If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What's the creepiest or scariest true encounter you've had in the woods, outdoors, or while camping or hiking that completely freaked you out?
The girl in the woods. I went for a walk in a local park today just to get some fresh air in these trying times. I was all masked up and ready to go have a nice normal walk through the woods, and for the first half hour, I did. Until I found a little stream and decided to follow it. I walked up through the woods for a bit when I found a log with a bunch of smushed mushrooms on it. As someone who embraces the cottagecore aesthetic, I leaned down to examine the mushrooms, considering that I might share a photo of them on my Tumblr. When I looked up, there was a girl standing a few feet away. She was short, barely 5 feet, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, with dark brown hair, and something about her was off. She smiled at me, and it felt very wrong. She beckoned to me, and I almost did. She said, "Can I have your name? I promise I'll be nice." At this point I'm freaking out. This girl appeared out of seemingly nowhere, asked for my name, and promised to be nice? Hell no. I politely declined and turned to walk away. Then she yelled, "Give me your name. I want it." I turned around, and she was inches away from me, just on the other side of the log. Of course, I sprinted out of there, not wanting to find out what this girl wanted with my name. As I ran back to my car, I could hear an unholy screech that only faded when I exited the woods. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but I thought this was creepy and belonged here. I like to walk/run in the forest trails, and one day I decided to go alone. I always go with someone, and as soon as I was about to enter the trail, a man who was just arriving to the parking area in his car honked his horn and waved at me. Initially, I thought, oh, maybe it's someone I know, so I waved back. However, as I walked towards the car, I realized that I didn't know him and decided to walk back into the forest. He drove off, and I thought that was the end of it. I thought maybe he was just a friendly stranger, so I kept walking, but within 2-ish minutes, he was behind me, and then he started to walk next to me and talk to me. He was thin, had long unkempt hair, and overall, he just scared me. He had a big tote bag hanging from one shoulder and his opposite arm inside it. He said, "Yeah, I just came to walk with my cat, she's inside my bag. She loves coming here." At this point I had stopped walking, and we were just standing on the trail facing each other. The whole time he talked to me, he kept coming closer and closer. I didn't realize just how much we had traveled until I noticed I wasn't on the cement trail anymore. I was on the actual forest grass really close to the trees. He kept asking if he could walk me or if I wanted to go with him. His persistent closeness, combined with his hand inside the bag as if he were about to pull something out, really started to freak me out. I became increasingly anxious and nervous, and I knew he could sense it, but that didn't deter him. Any normal person would have sensed the discomfort and left me alone. I told him I had to go and started to take steps backwards to the entrance of the trail, where I had just come from. I decided I wasn't going to keep going, and I was just going to go back to my car. He kept walking towards me as I was walking away, saying, "Oh, why? Do you have a husband? Or, what else do you have to do?" I'm not sure what his intentions were, but I'm convinced that if it weren't for the fact that there were so many bicyclists passing by that day, he would have done something to me. Creepy story from years ago. This happened years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I do not believe in ghosts or anything of that sort, and I am certain there is a logical explanation for this somewhere. However, it still creeps me out to this day. So my stepfather works out of town, and he used to stay the whole week away from the family, and we had a tradition of all taking turns having sleepovers when he was gone. It was my turn to have a sleepover in my mother's bedroom, which has always unsettled everyone. Seriously. If there has ever been a ghost in the house, it is definitely back there. I won't discuss the details surrounding that room since it's not the focus of this story, but just know that the bedroom is strange. I often hear noises like things moving around, scratching and pounding at the door, and the bathroom and closet lights flicker, just odd occurrences. But anyway, at the time everyone was pretty scared and never wanted to be in there by themselves. During the sleepover, my mom said she was going to go outside to smoke a cigarette, and she asked me if I wanted to keep the lights on until she got back. Of course I asked her to keep the light on. So she goes outside, and I'm kind of just chilling in the room for a few minutes trying not to be freaked out when the lights turn out and I feel someone get into the bed next to me. I thought it was my mom, so I didn't turn around. Instead, I said something like "Hi" or "Welcome back." Then, my mom began rubbing my back with her cold hands, which made sense since she had just been outside smoking. Anyway, she continued to rub my back and then began scratching it, which became increasingly uncomfortable and eventually painful. It wasn't a normal back rub or back itching anymore, she was hurting me. I asked her to stop, and at first she didn't, but after I asked again, it went back to a normal gentle back rub. But, as you may have expected, it wasn't my mom after all. She came in the room and was all like, "I thought you wanted the light on," and I was like, "Yeah, I did, but you came back a few minutes ago, remember?" And then she was like, "No, I just came back inside right now." Feeling confused and a bit freaked out, I finally rolled over to look at her as she was just getting into bed. I asked her again if she was sure she had just come in, and she replied, "Yeah, I just finished smoking." Which I thought was weird, because then who was hurting my back? So I asked my mom if she could shine her phone's flashlight on my back because it felt itchy, and when she looked at it, she said it was all red with scratch marks, and she joked about me being flexible. I just still think of this literally years later and am like, yeah, what was that all about? I was backcountry camping with 2 friends and my girlfriend. We had our 2 dogs with us, and right around sunset, they started barking like crazy out of nowhere. Seconds later some lone middle-aged guy came through the trees to greet us. His clothes were pretty tattered, and he looked pretty beat. We asked where he even came from, and he said he parked his ATV back some distance on the trail. We heard no engine sounds. He was asking us all sorts of questions about when we got there, when we were leaving, etc. In a normal situation, those might be harmless questions, but it definitely put me on high alert. I went back to the tent while he spoke to our friends, and I grabbed my knife to hide in my waist. My dogs were still going insane and not letting him come physically close to us at all. When I came back out, I started making comments, insinuating that he'd been visiting long enough, and we had stuff to get done around the site. He obliged and walked off back through the trees. All I could think was that this is too close to the plot of a horror movie. I was incredibly thankful that my dogs were being aggressively protective, and I slept with my knife under my pillow that night. The next day, when we left, we noticed all the trees that had fallen onto the trail were cut up, and the trail was clear. Maybe he was telling the truth and was actually just somebody keeping the trail maintained. It would explain why he looked like he had just finished a long day of work when we saw him, and it would also mean he was telling the truth about having the ATV to get around. Regardless, I'll never know if this was a harmless but strange interaction, or if my dogs had kept us safe from something malicious that night. I thought it was my toddler. This was a few years back, but from time to time, I still have an eerie feeling. For background, I sleep in my son's room in a separate bed, as he has autism and needs me a lot in the night. When he was a toddler, I had him in a toddler bed with that half-guard rail thing. He would wake in the middle of the night and crawl on the floor giggling because he knew he was being a sneaky little bugger. So one night, I had a feeling like someone sat on the edge of my bed. I turned over and saw my son crawling around on the floor, like he usually does. So I told him, "Get back in bed," and literally as soon as I said that, I heard a snore. I looked back over at his bed, and he was lying there asleep. I looked back at the floor, and nothing was there. The update to this now that my son is older is that I used to feel the something sit on the edge of my bed feeling all the time, then it stopped for, several years. But recently I've been feeling the something sitting on the edge of my bed feeling again. A creepy experience. This happened way back when I was still in high school, about 21 years ago. Back then I used to hang out with friends at night, doing the usual stuff a teenage kid would do. Anyways, I used to pass by this wooden fence that serves as a division of a vacant lot in the property of my buddy's parents, where their house is. It's a typical, worn wooden fence with a hole to crawl through. I used to crawl through that hole in the fence to get to my friend's house instead of walking around the block. I used to call it a shortcut. One night, after hanging out with my buddies, I decided to go home. It was already a bit late in the evening, and I still had to wake up early the next morning for school. So I went to use the shortcut, the fence with a hole in it where I can crawl. As I was crawling, my body was already halfway through the hole when I noticed that there was a figure of a man standing about 10 feet away from me on the other side of the fence in the vacant lot. All I can see is a silhouette because it's dark, and the only light is coming from a nearby house. I think it was facing me, but I can't see its face. However, a few parts of its legs are slightly illuminated by the lights from the nearby house. At first I think that it's one of my buddies that would also use the shortcut at the fence. So I called a few names, but then no answer. What was odd at that time was that figure never moved. It's just there, standing still. Not even a sound came from it. Feeling a bit unnerved by it, I decided that it's best that I should instead walk around the block rather than continue going to the other side of the fence on the vacant lot where this odd figure is standing. So that's what I did, walk around the whole block. After I arrived at my house, I noticed the dogs were howling in the general direction of the vacant lot, and it gave me goosebumps. Up until now, I believed that what I encountered that night was not human, It just appeared human. I got an Airbnb when I was like 22, a single female. I was specifically only looking for female-hosted Airbnbs, but when I showed up, it was a dude who told me his sister was the host and she was out of town. The old Victorian house was creaky and had wind chimes on the porch, but I needed a place to sleep. My room was at the end of a hallway on the second floor, and it didn't even have a bed in it, just a mattress. In the middle of the night, a yowling cat woke me up. I distinctly heard heavy footsteps come down the hallway, saw a light come on, and heard the person whisper angrily to the cat. The light went off, and I waited to hear receding steps, and nothing. I sat waiting to hear the footsteps, and a couple of minutes later, my doorknob jiggled. I was petrified. Seriously considered jumping out the window. I sat all night watching the door, holding a lamp as protection. I waited until like 4:30 in the morning, got up my courage, and just ran out the door, down the stairs, and out of the house. I'll never stay in an Airbnb alone again. My family home is haunted by its previous owners. I don't remember who found this story out, but way before my family owned our house, a couple lived there, and they couldn't have children. They tried and tried but could never succeed, so it was just a husband and his wife. Then one day, the husband got sick and died in the basement, which served as the main living area and contained their bedroom and bathroom. Shortly after the husband died, it's said that the wife died of a broken heart or something. Anyway, my family owns the house now, and we believe the wife wore a grieving gown up until she died, or maybe a wedding dress, but we can't tell. We see her as a dark shadow at the end of the hallway or in the corner of our eyes, so we could never fully tell. And the husband is solely in the basement. And the specific time I remember was when I was hanging a hammock in the basement, and right next to me there was a bin full of old toys from when everyone, including my mother, aunt, and uncle, was little. One of the toys was a dog-shaped figure that had buttons on its paws and ears. Well, it went off randomly, saying, "Ha ha, that tickles. Do it again." Mind you, I was nowhere close to touching that thing, so I freaked out and ran to my uncle, and we went back to the bin, and he picked it up to take a look at the battery pack, and there was literally nothing in the battery pack, so there was no way for it to be an active toy, you know? Well, while he was looking, it went off in his hand and started singing. We freaked out and ran, and while we were running to the stairs, I took a quick glance next to me, and there was a life-size Barbie that my mother got when she was, like 8, she's 36 now. That creepy doll started moving on its own, like its arms and legs started to move upward as if to reach out to us, and it started rocking while its limbs moved, so I freaked out more and ran faster, and needless to say, neither I nor my uncle have stepped foot in that basement since. I think it was the old man messing with us, but I'm not 100% sure because, from what I heard, both he and his wife loved kids, so I don't think they'd do such a scary thing. Creepy music and singing in the forest. So I was walking around Turku, Finland, late at night with a friend, and there was nobody else around. Then, from behind a corner, we heard some creepy music from the forest. It sounded weird and kind of haunting, like it was played on some old, strange instrument. Thereafter, we went to the nearby market, and about 30 minutes later we came back. Then we heard a woman's voice singing in the forest, but it wasn't clear words or any language, it was more like humming or singing without actual lyrics. We got closer, but suddenly the singing stopped. We ran away scared, and near where we heard the voice, I saw something glowing behind the bushes, a bright light in a strange shape. After that I still heard the singing from farther away even though we were already quite far from there. This didn't technically happen to me, but it did happen, per se, around me. Little background, I used to live in a very haunted apartment for 3 years. Anything from poltergeist activity, things moving by themselves, all the way to the beginning of possession. I never had an issue with sleep talking until living in that apartment, and my roommate would find me having full conversations with no one, telling people I would end them. Eventually, I started talking in a different voice. One night we were watching a movie in his room, I passed out, and we had both dogs with us also. He gets up to go to the bathroom, and when he comes back, both of our dogs are perked up, staring into our dark and empty living room, like something has their attention. At that moment, my roommate hears a noise approaching him, which quickly escalates into the sound of someone sprinting. So he books it into the room and slams the door. Obviously shaken, he turns back to look at the dogs, and I am now fully sitting up, staring at the door. I guess in the most calm yet creepy voice I could, "I'm still asleep," and I say, "The person in the living room doesn't like you." Both dogs are staring at the door at this point, hair on their backs all raised. He asked me about it in the morning, and I have no recollection of anything. My dumb teenage self, my cousin, and my best friend at the time were bored out of our minds in our small town and decided to explore an old abandoned warehouse. This place was weird, like they just left one day with all the stuff still there. Lots of materials and parts. There were different floors, and we were on the second floor, in what looked like an inventory room. There were so many shelves all stacked with a bunch of different stuff, and all over the floor were plastic pieces. We were looking around when all of a sudden we heard a lot of crunching, like someone was running on the plastic pieces. My friend started laughing hysterically, and I thought she was trying to scare me. I told her to knock it off, and she said that it wasn't her, and she was laughing because she was genuinely scared that we weren't alone. My cousin and I panicked when we heard more running. We tried to be quiet as we turned back the way we came, but then we heard, clear as day, "I hear you." And we started panicking at this point. We were scrambling to get out of there when we heard, "I see you too." We bolted. Running as fast as we could out of there and back to my car. We never saw who or what was in there with us, but it definitely taught us never to go exploring like that again. Looking back now, it was probably a squatter who just wanted us idiotic teenagers out of their shelter, but in the moment we thought we were going to be ended. When I was approximately 12 or 13 years old, I was walking with my male friend to visit our girlfriend's house. The walk was approximately a mile at most, and it took place at night. Consequently, we planned to play ghost in the graveyard, as our girlfriend's residence was just outside of town, where it was darker and we could be louder. About halfway through the trip there are no streetlights, just pitch black woods surrounding the two of us. We kept hearing something waking to our right, just past the tree line, but every time I took my flashlight out, nothing was there. This goes on for about 500 yards, when whatever this thing was starts sprinting at us. Like full-on running, I remember almost feeling the footsteps on the ground. My guy friend and I take off in our own sprint, but this thing was right behind us, and I was too scared to turn around. We get to the top of a hill when we hear some other creature almost yell. Kind of like those old Bigfoot shows on TV where they call out to Bigfoot. That sound made whatever was chasing us stop and run the other direction. Although the chase lasted maybe 30 seconds at most, I knew that we probably shouldn't be running towards whatever made the sound, but it was farther away than whatever was chasing us. We kept running to our friend's house without looking back, and to this day I don't know what either creature was. And nobody believes us, not even our friend. I don't go on that road anymore. Them outside the window. My twin brother texted me, asking if I remember people outside our window in the backyard and just beyond the fence in the woods. A memory came crashing back into my mind. Something I had forgotten that terrified me to the bone. A chill went through my body thinking about it. My childhood home is in the middle of the woods in Roy, Washington. Roy is your typical small town in Washington. The town primarily consisted of a gas station and an elementary school. We lived about a mile or two outside of the town itself, down a long gravel road with thick trees on either side. I didn't know what light pollution was until I moved out at 18. Roy was considered part of the Nisqually tribe's land before the town was founded in 1809. One night when I was 11 years old, I woke up to the feeling of eyes around me. My curtains were shut and my window was open, all that I could see with what little light the moon had to offer when my curtains would blow from a gust of spring air was a bedroom with comic books on a beanbag chair, action figures on a bookshelf, and a messy closet. I turned on my lamp to take a better look around my room. No scary figures in the corner magically turned into a pile of clothes or ghosts turning into a hanging coat. Everything was as I left it when I went to sleep. Even though I was not scared of monsters under the bed at that age, I still checked there. I switched off my lamp and settled back in my bed. It wasn't long after that this feeling of pupils directed towards me returned. I sit back up, taking in my surroundings once more, with nothing but the same as before. This feeling felt more concentrated towards my window. I peeked my head out from under the curtains, allowing them to drape over the back of my head. 10 figures stood scattered in my backyard facing the house. Some are 10 feet from the house, some 20, and some behind the fence. I couldn't see more, but I felt more in the woods. I could not make out their faces with the light of the night sky. Their faces were blurry, distorted like static, and dark. I could not see the eyes that peered at me, but nevertheless, I could feel their unwavering gaze. I could hear a soft melody being emitted from one, then another would let out a melody, followed by another, and another, until it reached back to the first. Like communication, this wasn't a jumbled up mess of noises but more like a soft tune being carried by the wind. I went to wake up my parents in the next room. My mom told me that I had a nightmare and that it was nothing. I asked her to look outside in the backyard. My dad, now awake, told me that he would go check it out. He may have believed that it was a nightmare as well, but after news of a neighbor having a break-in the week prior, he wasn't going to take the chance of trespassers. He went in the dark to the kitchen window downstairs. Nothing. He told me it was safe and to go to bed. I remember as I was going back into my room, my twin brother was walking out of my parents' room. By the morning I was convinced it was a nightmare, and like many nightmares I had as a child, it slipped away from memory. That was until my twin brother texted me, asking if I remembered seeing people in our backyard. He had similar experiences that night. He caught them leaving, though. When he heard me and my dad walking down the stairs, he saw these figures dissipate like dirt being swept away by the wind. By the time Dad and I reached the downstairs, they had vanished. He remembers the tune that passed through them. He catches himself whistling it when he does the dishes or drives to work. We both don't know what they were. They didn't seem like people, ghosts, or spirits. They felt like something older than a ghost. Something more connected to what's on the land. We just call them, for the lack of a better name. We never saw them again, and they faded into nothing in my mind. I am female and was hiking alone in the mountains in an isolated area, and two men kept appearing and disappearing at intervals. There was something not right about them, as they were not properly dressed for hiking and generally looked sketchy. By the third time they appeared, I had my firearm out of my pack and was holding it at the ready. I did not want to have to use it but would have if they had tried anything. The men saw me with my S&W Model 27 and left the area precipitously. I did not see them again and finished the hike. By the way, those were the only two people I saw on the trail that foggy, misty day. Pitch black biking in the country, a scary story. So when I was younger, I used to be a bit of a thrill seeker. I lived in a quiet town called Roseville with, like 800 people in it in the middle of nowhere, miles of country roads with nothing really on them in every direction. I was approximately 18 years old and enjoyed riding my bike into the countryside between 1 and 3 a.m., up until this incident occurred, lol, so I would leave the house. It was around 1 a.m. The nearest road, Township Road 14, is about a 4-minute ride out of town, and it becomes pitch black at Trussler Road, making the ride a bit scary. It's in Ayr, Ontario, if you want to look at where I was for reference. There are a ton of coyotes and nothing really that would kill you, but it's still scary being out there when you can't see a foot in front of your face with nothing but a crappy flash from my phone 16 years ago. But I loved doing that. It made me feel alive. I would hold the phone with one hand, pointing it toward the road, while guiding myself to stay within the roadway, otherwise, I risked veering directly into the ditch or field. Anyways, about a mile into Township Road 14 from Trussler, I heard another bicycle approaching me from ahead, where the next small city is a 40-minute fast bike ride away. I could hear the other cyclist pedaling at about the same speed as I was, not fast, just pacing myself in the pitch black, and I could also hear the noise of their bike getting closer. That already freaked me out enough that, as it got closer, I didn't want to put my light in their direction. I kept my light as low as possible to illuminate only the road and minimize my visibility, and while riding past them, I thought about a creepy killer on a bike trying to get me in the middle of the night, which made me feel a strong sense of unease. Suddenly, I heard a quiet voice, likely from a girl around my age, approximately 15 to 18 years old, casually say, "Hey," as she passed by me. I replied, "Hey," and that was the end of our exchange, but the crazy part hit me about 2 minutes later. That person had no light or any way to navigate, and it was literally impossible to bike on that road without some type of light, but as they biked away, I kept turning around and then realized they had no light, and they had no light while coming towards me, and that freaked me the hell out because I have insanely good vision, and I'm convinced that was not possible. Furthermore, I ultimately had to turn around and return home, and that experience was the most unsettling feeling I have ever encountered. Even more so than being chased by farm dogs on my bike in the dark, which is also exceedingly intimidating. Dark. I think about that strange encounter more as I get older, and I can see that person telling the same story from her perspective and saying, "What the F was that?" My so went mountain biking back in a large area of power lines and woods and fields. So I took the two dogs, one white lab chow mix and one wolf husky mix. He went way ahead, and I got my stuff together and went in to walk. I was walking, and two sketchy guys came driving up in a pickup out of nowhere. They asked if I knew how to get to blah blah, and I didn't know what they meant, and I said no. But a bunch of guys are in here doing mountain bike racing, so I'm sure you'll see them, and they might know. That was completely untrue. But both dogs, the adult and the 8-month-old, had all their wolf hairs standing up, and I had never seen my adult dog do that. The one in the passenger seat was the talker and started to ask a few more questions that didn't really mean anything. The adult dog low growled. The driver started saying something in the background like, "Come on, man, just do it, dude. Come on, let's just get it, dude. Why are you sitting?" in a muffled voice. The talker said, "Where are they?" And I said, "I think it's just over the hill because this is the spot they marked as the finish line." Every hair on my body felt stiff. He swatted at the driver and said, "Dude, just drive, and we'll go turn around." I immediately went as fast as I could to a trail I saw ahead and to the right, and I dipped into the brush as far as I possibly could. Shaking. The dog's hairs are both all up at the same time. I sat there while they turned around and drove very slowly, scanning the area. As an experienced backpacker, I was able to effectively conceal myself and the dogs in the woods. They got out and stood around looking. Then left. My partner finally came by about 35 minutes later, and I still had not stopped shaking. He didn't understand why. I don't know how I thought up to say a number of guys were racing and that we were standing at the finish area. I'm glad I did. I still, 30 years later, feel like I want to tell that story to the police in town. Just in case there was ever something else. But I really cannot, for the life of me, come up with any description other than that both were white, and gave me and two dogs the chills. I'm glad I really was there with him, though, because if I were alone, they'd likely have been waiting at my car, and it was a semi-secluded access spot to the area. It wasn't me it happened to, however, I did witness it. I was about 11 at the time, and we lived in a house that had strange things happen all the time. Nothing like crazy. Little things like bumps in the night and stuff being where you didn't leave it. I remember it was around Halloween. We were buying stuff for a party at the end of the month, and my mom bought some rubber masks. My little brother grabbed one, and it was a typical red devil mask. We had an attic, and we always kept it closed. This day my brother, who was 2 or 3 at the time, was running around with the mask on. He was laughing and stuff, and out of nowhere he just went silent. My mom and I get concerned because he was quiet for a few minutes, and we see him in the hallway, staring straight up at the open attic. My mom calls out to him, and he doesn't respond or acknowledge her. It was like he was in a trance. My mom pulls him away from the attic's opening, and he starts laughing again like nothing happened. What made it more creepy was he had tears in his eyes when we took the mask off. This happened to my brother back in around 2005-ish. He went to a sleepover at his friend's house with about 6 other friends. In the area that his friend lived/still lives in was an old mental asylum that was closed down. It was the middle of the summer, but it was during a terrible rainstorm that they decided to go out to this asylum and check everything out. They had to sneak around because there were police that patrolled the grounds occasionally for possible homeless or looters. After sneaking inside, they decided it would be best to break off into 2 groups to check everything out and cover more ground. They all also had their cell phones with them. The first 3 floors were dead, and they just used the flashlights they brought with them. After being bored of not finding anything too crazy, they all decided to meet up and check out the basement. Always in the basement, all the weird stuff happens at that location, from what I've been told from friends that visit there. So the group of 8 all head down into the basement, and right when they get to the bottom, they start to hear distant sounds like people talking. 2 people from the group start to walk down the main hallway, one of whom is my brother. Everyone else are all somewhat together but are all just checking out rooms to see what's inside. After my brother and his friend walk about 200 to 300 feet into the hallway, they stop in the middle of the hallway because they notice one of the 2 flashlights they had started to turn off. As young kids/teens get older, they start to get scared. The flashlight turns on when they point it at the correct door, revealing an old, beaten-up wheelchair slowly rolling back into a room. They freaked out, and all the other friends ran over. They all go quiet and look towards the doorway. Nothing but water droplets can be heard because of the rain and potentially flooded basement. One friend approaches and notices the wheelchair sitting motionless in the middle of the room, but he feels that the room is inexplicably cold, unlike the rest of the warm basement. Then, from the corner of his eye, he sees the wheelchair start to creep toward him. The friend freaks out and runs to my brother and his friends. As soon as they all regroup on the ground, the wheelchair slowly moves to the other room across the hallway, and everyone's flashlights suddenly turn off. They all freak out and hear what seems to be a doctor talking to a patient, saying some mumbled words. Then the wheelchair moves backward out of the room and is suddenly propelled by an unknown force to about 2 feet away from them. They all freak out like crazy and decide that was enough to run out of there. They ended up getting home after all that, but decided that they must have been messed with by someone or something, as they don't believe in anything paranormal. Not the best story, but the only thing I've heard about anything paranormal so far. This was an incident that deeply scared me as a child. When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi, about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter mile north from the house, he built a small lake, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane, and we named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or two. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play Ole Miss. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. So I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bully that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field but larger, with an L-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane led to a steep decline that descended toward the shore and the small pier. Across the lake, on the west side, there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling I have come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life this day. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Bully must have felt it too because a few seconds later I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west. I looked towards the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction, and almost immediately my eyes lit on what I thought to be a half silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree slowly. Bully stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop, and I turned my head north towards the dam while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north and always facing me. The saying "scared stiff" was something I found to be true. For some reason I thought it important that whoever or whatever it was did not know I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would make its path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the Army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I have ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bully dashed ahead of me, and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped some 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back, just epic. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this scene now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings and the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. Whenever my friends, my little sister, or I wanted to go anywhere outside the area around the cabin, I made sure that our parents accompanied us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who or what the hell was watching me from the woods that day? Guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back then as a grown man with military training, as I am now. Bully lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but wonderful dog. The best dog I have ever known. The dog in the road. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple of friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the entire day with him, and it was quite late when we ultimately decided to begin our drive back home. My friend Lisa was dozing off in the passenger seat. She had had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, Was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds I could hear being that of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt, and it felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes, and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an upset look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window, and, sure enough, a dog was lying in the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gotten over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me that something was off. I'm no braggart, but I consider myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my tail lights. It was a fairly big dog. At least a golden retriever or something like that. One particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert on the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around joyfully. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car. The 2 dogs. So I live in the country part of North Alabama, and we go to my grandparents' house a lot. My grandparents' farm has a significant amount of woods, and I have explored nearly every creek and ditch on the property. Recently, I have felt uneasy being there and have encountered many unsettling things, but none like this. I was jogging down to the creek on the property to cross the bridge. Everything was normal, but then I got a feeling to look to my right. There under a tree sat 2 dogs, both dark gray with short fur and extremely enormous. I'm 6 feet 1 inch, and they look to be at least 5 feet 8 inches just by sitting on their back legs. I've never seen anything like this ever in my life. I thought, okay, those have to be 2 stumps or something, but in the back of my mind I believed, I've been there, though I don't remember those stumps. Just as I had that thought, one of the stumps turned its head to my left. My heart sank, not in I can't believe this but in fear. They just sat there watching me. I ran like a bat out of hell and I ran, never looking back. I knew if I looked back, I might as well be a dead man. I ran straight to my grandparents' house and shut the door and told my aunt, my mom, and my grandma everything. At first they thought it was coyotes, but I've seen them many times, and I know those weren't coyotes. At this point my family thought I was crazy, and they still don't believe me to this day. Horrific night camping. I was a 19-year-old female at the time. I love camping. Whenever my friends and I returned home from college, we would fill our cooler with beer, gather some equipment, and spend time engaging in leisure activities outdoors. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded yet within a safe distance from civilization that I could run and get help. Camping occasionally unsettles me, but that unsettling sensation can also serve as a certain advantage for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I sensed someone was observing me, which caused me to halt abruptly. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, then see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with the armful of what I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. Around 1 I decide to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars, another reason I like camping. I can act however I want, so I passed out relatively quickly. At about 2 o'clock I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or other animal, more likely a raccoon because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard, though. After about 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my K-bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking with me. And then as suddenly as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours. But I sure as shit wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden at about 4 o'clock I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak the duck out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabbed me around the mouth. I opened my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slipped between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and, there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous, his finger popped off. He screamed and pulled his hand away, with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on, and I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to, a little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers, and steel-toe boots. I also had some blood oozing from my lip, which was not from the finger injury but rather because I had bitten a significant chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened, they called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back it was light out. What I saw only increased my fear when they brought me back to retrieve my friend's car. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky. The woman singing at night. Throughout my childhood, I consistently harbored a desire to embark on nighttime bike rides. There was something inherently captivating about the idea that resonated deeply with me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She asked me to wear my helmet, have my phone, and take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me. So right after the sun set, I was off. I loved it. There were no individuals out walking their dogs, no children playing nearby, and the temperature was ideal, among other things. It was really fun, so fun that I ignored the limits my mom set. You see, where I was biking were all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between 2 neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The area outside the limits, specifically the destination of the path I was on, was barren. I rode this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses inside the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I hear singing. It sounded about 30, 40 feet in front of me. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. But she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy? That's what her voice sounded like. I inch forward to try and see her. I get close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down, like she was headbanging. I decide to get my flashlight out. I'm thinking that maybe this person is in need of help or something. Or maybe this is an insane person, and the light will scare them away. So I take the flashlight out of my pocket, point it at her, and turn it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had dirty hair. She was wearing a very oversized, bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was, too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, "Sorry," in a very oops this is the wrong room kind of way. She didn't respond. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screamed. She screams in an awful, horrible, high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I throw myself back onto my bike. I hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't look behind me, and I don't stop pedaling. Her screaming grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. I worked as a park ranger for a few summers. It was a great job, but the downside was dealing with the public. I have tons of crazy stories, but only one extremely creepy story. I was scheduled to close the park one night with another girl. The park opened at dawn and closed at dusk. The closing duties were to drive around, ensure everyone left, and close the gates. You had to ensure that everyone was out, or else they would remain locked inside. Kristen and I got into a truck together to inspect the day-use picnic area, both campgrounds, and all bathrooms. When we left the upper lot, there were no cars in the parking lot of the ranger station. We cruised around and checked all areas. All was good, so we drove back up to the gate and ranger station to close up. I got out to close the gate and jumped back into the truck. Kristen pointed out that while we were gone, a Jeep had parked in the parking lot. We thought this was super weird since we hadn't seen anyone park there earlier, but whatever. We parked the truck a couple of spots away from the Jeep and got out. We figured we'd just tell the person to leave, and then we could go home. As we approached the vehicle, we could barely see someone sitting in the driver's seat. We had dim street lamps, so we knew someone was in there. I waved and got no response. No movement. Kristen knocked on the window, the person didn't respond. We both started feeling like something was wrong. I got chills standing there, and we both stepped away from the Jeep, alarmed at the lack of response. We both decided to go get our boss, who lived across the street on site. We weren't supposed to bother him at night, but this was too weird. He got his shoes on and walked over with us. As we were crossing the street, we saw the door to the Jeep slowly open. Then all three of us saw a figure creep out of the vehicle and crawl underneath. All we saw was a shadow, since there wasn't a lot of light. All of us were scared shitless. It was something out of a horror movie. Kristen got on the phone with the police while my boss and I slowly approached the vehicle. My boss told the person they needed to leave and that we were calling the cops. We could see someone sitting under the lifted Jeep, near the front tires. The person wasn't moving or responding. Once the police showed up, they were visibly freaked out too. They had guns drawn and everything. It turned out to be some person tripping on meth. We had no idea why they showed up at the park or what they were doing there, but the cops did find drugs and a loaded gun in the vehicle. After that night, my boss changed all policies regarding closing duties. He added extra closers, and we had to carry mace. It was truly terrifying to witness someone creep out of their car and scramble like an animal underneath. It was like she was possessed. I didn't see the man watching me in the bushes. My dog did. I am a small woman, about 5 feet 1 inch on my tiptoes, living next to a college campus downtown in a large city. There is a fairly high crime rate with drugs, a homeless population, robberies, and other stuff. I'm in grad school and needed somewhere close to campus, so here I am. I have 2 dogs as pets, because I love dogs. The older shepherd puppy I got not too long ago likes to bark at everyone, so I take her on walks early in the morning before work to avoid her crapfests. One morning around 5 a.m., I'm walking the noisy she puppy around the block. My apartment building is adjacent to a seminary school, where college boys become priests. My university is Catholic. It has some gardening out front, along with some tall bushes and plants. My dog hits the brakes in front of the bushes. She's staring at them. I can't get her to walk any further no matter what I do. I can see the hair standing on her back. She's still staring at this one goddamn bush in particular. She loses her shit, growling and barking. Even with her teeth bared, I still can't get her to walk. She's noisy, but I noticed how vicious she sounded this time. I hadn't seen her act like this before. I finally realize maybe she isn't really the world's most overzealous gardener, and I follow her line of sight. There's a man looking back at us. I can barely see him through the leaves, but I can make out his shape, and he's a hell of a lot bigger than me. He doesn't move, but he's watching me. I keep waiting for him to move or go away, but he doesn't. I don't like to think I scare easily, but this guy scared the absolute shit out of me. I pulled my still barking dog and walked back the way we came. I think I walked backwards. I kept looking back behind me so much to go home. If I hadn't had my dog with me, I would not have seen him. He never did anything, and he didn't follow me home. Creeped out as hell. Washington backwoods creepy stories. My boyfriend and I have experienced some creepy, surreal, and outright odd events in Washington state, and I wanted to share them to see if anyone else has similar stories or knows anything about these occurrences. 1. Sinkholes and white creatures. Around 2020 through 2021, We were doing a lot of exploring since we were out of work due to the pandemic. Originally from New Mexico, we were new to the area. We spent some time in Port Angeles and then road trip through the western and southern parts of the Olympic Peninsula. We stopped in Quileute and checked out Rosario Beach, which was breathtaking. On our way out, we found a nice spot off the road in the woods to make a quick sandwich before the drive south to the Quinault Reservation. My boyfriend is Quinault Cowlitz. By this time it was starting to get dark, but the trees in the area were so beautifully dense and mossy, we decided to take a little walk. We both love nature and feel really connected to it, so a short walk in the woods at that time of day didn't initially seem too daunting, especially together. As we walked and as the last bits of sunlight faded into darkness, a heavy and very eerie feeling came over me. We noticed what we can only describe as sinkholes in the area, and we got a little freaked out because my boyfriend took a step, and his foot sank into the ground up to his thigh. I had to help pull him out, and as he got free, more of the ground fell away and widened into a literal hole going straight down. The detritus in the area is so thick and layered that it makes the ground extremely soft and fragile. We wanted to get out of the danger area as soon as we got the chance, so we started carefully heading back. I still had that eerie feeling, and the night became freezing cold. This was early September, and although the day felt warm at around 80 degrees, the sudden temperature drop seemed unusual. However, it might be typical for a forested area. I could see my breath and couldn't stop shivering. As we continued on our way back, we decided that we weren't backtracking properly because we should have been at the car at that point, and so we tried to pull up Google Maps, but we didn't have service under the thick canopy. We tried our best to reorient ourselves and find anything that looked familiar, but nothing seemed right. In fact, we had not walked very far before we encountered the sinkholes. Maybe 100 to 200 meters? So finding our way back shouldn't have been this difficult. Then I started hearing rustling in the bushes around us. I asked my boyfriend if he was hearing it too, and he said yes. As we walked, I stayed as close to him as I could and just kept my eyes on the ground, watching where I stepped, letting him lead the way. Every once in a while I would check the surroundings, and I swear I was seeing a white indiscernible shape moving between the trees just beyond the perimeter of the headlamps. I mean, maybe I was just scared and hallucinating, especially since it was so dark and the forest can be really disorienting. But I started to get frightened. I felt totally at the mercy of that wild place. I asked, "Are you seeing that movement?" And my boyfriend confirmed. He is more of the strong and silent type and didn't say much. He just kept holding my hand and said he could see the way out into a clearing, so he led us there. We came out into a work area where the ground was being dug up with large machines, and we were pretty confused as to how we ended up so far from the car. Luckily from there we could see the paved road we had parked on, so we beelined there and eventually got to the car. I was so relieved. I looked at the map since the service was available, and we had walked about a kilometer from where we ended up. But it didn't feel like we had walked that far, and on the map there were dirt logging roads that we would have had to cross to get there, and we never saw one. The next morning I asked my boyfriend about what we saw the night before, and he said he knew I was really scared, so he didn't want to elaborate on what he was seeing at the time. Apparently he saw 2 to 3 white but kind of hazy looking humanoid figures moving from tree to tree and behind bushes the entire time we were walking back. He also heard strange noises resembling a human vocalization that quickly repeated ah, ah, ah in a high-pitched, soft, and somewhat feminine tone. I don't know how else to describe the sound my BF imitated. I didn't hear that specifically, but to be fair, I could only hear my own heavy breathing and heart pounding out of fear, lol. I always feel safe with my boyfriend. We have been together 10 years now, and I have no doubt he would do what was necessary to protect me/us, but how do you protect yourself from something like that? Additionally, I was unaware that sinkholes could exist in the forest like that. I couldn't find much information online about sinkholes in Washington, which is surprising. 2. Hogheads. We were driving into the forest off of Highway 2 somewhere between Sultan and Gold Bar. I can't remember the exact location, but we drove past a pile of hog heads, legs, entrails, and skins. We turned around and parked to investigate, and it was clear that someone had just dumped what they considered scraps just off the side of the road. It wasn't very far from other houses, and it was super creepy. 3. Something watching from the trees. We were driving on Highway 530 between Mansford and Rockport. I think it was around 1 a.m. We pulled off on the side of the road because my boyfriend needed to grab some cold medicine from the trunk. I got out for a second just to get some fresh air. Where we parked was a turnaround point, and to the right was a steep hill/mountain. I got an overwhelming feeling that we shouldn't be there all of a sudden, and then I could smell the worst, most dehydrated, thick urine smell. Not quite like an animal but almost like an unwell person. I said, "I smell urine," "We need to leave," and my boyfriend agreed, so we quickly left the area. Later I learned that people sometimes say that with Sasquatch encounters they smell urine-like or skunky smells. I have no idea what it was, and I didn't see anything in the tree line, but I definitely felt like there was a presence up there watching that didn't want us there. 4. Ghost on the road. We were driving south from Larrabee State Park along Chuckanut Road into the farmlands at night, and all of a sudden an almost translucent human form appeared standing on the road just a second before we drove by, and we drove right through it. The form stayed the same as the car drove through, and I could see it go from outside of the vehicle to partially in the cab. I think technically it moved through my body too. I can only explain it as a ghost. It looked male, wearing one of those hipster low-profile baseball caps and a yellow-orange windbreaker. I wonder if he was hit by a car right there. Anyway, I know that's a lot. I have more stories, but I will cut it there. Thanks for listening. Please let me know if you've had any similar experiences. I love everything supernatural or just outright difficult to explain. I was living near the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I'd regularly go for an outing in my late teens/early 20s. As I peacefully walk with my very friendly and social dog, who evidently likes 99% of the people she meets, we suddenly encounter a person walking in the opposite direction on the trail. Immediately upon seeing this person, my dog's fur was standing straight up on end like a mohawk going from her neck to the base of her tail. She only displayed the behavior around aggressive dogs when she was younger, using it to communicate, "Leave me alone, I will defend myself if necessary." Before this stranger walked by, I never imagined she could act that way toward another human being due to her love for meeting new people. Seriously, because of her friendly and docile demeanor, it just didn't seem like a scenario that would ever unfold, yet this person merely walking by us spooked her and me badly. My dog is now 15 years old, and that one incident remains the only time she has displayed defensive aggression towards any human. Think like a golden retriever, but she never even barks when someone shows up. She doesn't even make a peep at the vet or mailman or anything. She wags her tail normally, or rarely, and in certain situations, she shows fear/discomfort in non-aggressive ways. This person could have possibly been close to 7 feet tall, with a gray beard, the wallet chain rattling with each step, and boots that seemed better suited for conflict and less for hiking, and my inner voice was saying, "Look out. That's a dangerous person." I had some tough-looking friends growing up, and at times, genuinely dangerous friends because they would act recklessly, run their mouths, get into fights, etc. So I don't typically judge a book by its cover. I've learned to read actions and body language more than a crazy style or whatever genetics you were born with. However, for anyone trying to visualize this person, imagine a road-weary biker who has been kicked out of his motorcycle gang and stands as tall as a basketball player in the woods, wearing dark clothes and a black vest with chains rattling. Yet, it wasn't just their appearance that caught my attention, it was the way they were walking. I could be wrong, but it didn't seem like they were hiking. I felt genuinely chilled to the bone, and what intensified that feeling was how both my dog and I became deeply spooked in a primitive or instinctual way. So that New Mexico encounter. My family is huge on travel, so I have a lot more stories like this. I know that you asked for Mexico stories, but I've only been there once, and nothing really happened. New Mexico, on the other hand, is a different story. Anyway, here you go. 3 years ago, my family took a vacation to visit my dad's relatives in New Mexico. My dad's family is very religious and wanted to show us some of the old churches nearby. We first visited a couple of churches in Albuquerque. They were stunning architecturally speaking, with the old castle-like shapes and stained glass. The next one we went to was called Loreto Chapel, located in Santa Fe. The church appeared very humble and unimportant at first glance, but then my aunt told me its rather odd history. In 1852, the Sisters of Loreto, a nun organization, moved to Santa Fe and started up an all-girls Catholic school. The school started off small, about 300 students, but began to grow quickly. The sisters saw the popularity of the school increasing and decided to purchase more property to build a second building. Because the second building was smaller than they'd hoped, an architect was hired to build a small staircase leading up to a second floor where another classroom would be. When the architect showed up, he bore nothing but wood, a saw, and a bucket of water. He built a spiral staircase with no nails, screws, glue, or supports. Everyone was impressed with his work, seeing as what he did, still to this day, is impossible. The staircase had been inspected multiple times, and all of the claims were true. The strangest part is that the man who built the staircase disappeared before they could pay him or ask any questions. There are many theories surrounding what happened to him or how the staircase was even possible, but the two most popular beliefs are that he is either an angel that was sent by God or someone practicing witchcraft who was ended by the church. Either way, it's still pretty creepy. The night before visiting Loretto Chapel, I had a weird vision thing about a carpenter standing next to a spiral staircase before I was even told about the origins. When we arrived, I took a long glare at the staircase, just before noticing a man standing behind it looking me in the eye. He looked around 30-ish and had old clothes on and gloves. He was carrying a bucket of water and splashing it on the staircase. When I pointed it out to a few people, they denied seeing him. This ran chills down my spine. The man then gave a wink, ascended the guarded staircase, and vanished into the second level. I know that this may not seem that scary, but it was to me after hearing about the origins. Anyway, I encourage you to do some research on the chapel, as it is very interesting. I grew up in an extremely rural Midwestern state. My family lived in the country between two small towns. I had attended school in both small towns and knew most of the families in the area either by face or last name. One night it was about 10 or 11, and I was leaving a high school basketball game in Town A. I was around 15 and driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, an early 90s Toyota with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it more than 5 or 6 miles out of town, and I had about 7 left to go. I found myself on a lengthy, sparsely traveled road that acted as a shortcut between two major highways in the aforementioned towns. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, as well as to this day, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited a while, and finally a nice, newer red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo on the side pulled up. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside with a woman and 2 girls. He offered me his phone. I remember noticing it was a track phone, which my friends and I at the time referred to as crack phones because you can't trace the owners and they are frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used a lot by people who can't afford a standard phone plan, but the family was driving a really nice vehicle, and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as odd. The phone got no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and finally gave up. The truck had been headed away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from, so when they offered me a ride, I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the trunk, and all of my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at the gas station on the way to their destination, and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car, I was caught off guard by the way the woman, who I assumed was his wife, and the 2 girls, who I assumed were their children, were dressed. Conservative families, including Amish and Mennonite ones, are not uncommon where I live. However, I was surprised by the women's clothing because the man appeared otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a flashy truck, and owning a cell phone. They all wore long, heavy skirts with button-up blouses and thin bonnets on their heads. One of the girls seemed to have a disability and made grunting noises every so often. Other than her noises, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving the opposite way of the direction he had been driving. The closest town the other way was still 15 or more miles, and it seemed out of his way. Out of politeness I reminded him that I had come from Town A, knew everyone there, and could find a ride home. It was late, and I figured he needed to get his family where they were going. At that moment, he informed me that he was from Town B, had a full gas can waiting at his house, and would take me there before bringing me back to my car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary, and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away, and he could drop me off there. He didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, but it seemed like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas. He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination, or if he wanted to make sure I made it home fine, he could drop me off at home. In my discomfort, I began engaging in casual conversation. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which was surprising but not totally unbelievable, coming from a town of around 3,000 people where I had spent the first decade of my life and where both of my parents still worked. I remember wishing that I had paid attention to the construction company name on the side of the truck, since most companies in my area were named after a family. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started to get more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way, late at night, in a rural community, to fix a fairly commonplace mishap. I had no idea who they were, I had never seen them before, I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone was undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to do, making me disappear would be a pretty easy task. I started shrieking that they just dropped me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a fit of panic, I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn. Take me home. Please take me home right now." Finally, for the first time, the wife spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed, "Just ducking, take her home." Outside of the girl's grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily onto my road, pulled into my driveway, let me out, and then reversed out of the driveway so fast that the tires spit gravel, and I couldn't even see the license plate or the name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents to tell them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what the intentions were, and maybe they just wanted to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. Not as scary as some stuff on here, but that's my experience. When I was about 14, I walked down to the cemetery that was a few streets over from my neighborhood to visit my uncle's grave. He and I were very close, and I was missing him a lot that day. I get down there, and there's a small group of people finishing a burial. I was walking around trying to find my uncle's grave, but I was having a hard time because his gravestone is flat. Therefore, I had to move aside some of the weeds and grass covering the stones in his burial section to see if any had his name on them. The people who were doing the burial finished up after 10 minutes, and then I was alone. I was still looking around for my uncle's gravesite when I saw a big truck stopped at the top of the hill. I figured it was just someone else there to visit their loved one, so I didn't think too much of it but was still a little wary because I was alone. I look around for another 10 minutes, silently cursing my family for going with a flat stone instead of one that was easier to recognize. I looked back over to where the truck was, and that's when they started coming down the hill my way. I never heard any sound of doors closing or saw anyone get in or out of that truck. I still cannot explain it to this day, but as that truck came down towards me, I became overwhelmed with this feeling of primal fear. I decided to leave and headed down the path to get back to the entrance. Now, the way the cemetery is laid out, there are 3 paths all leading down to the entrance. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a truck creeping slowly behind me on the path that ran parallel to the one I was walking on. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see who was driving it, but I knew it wasn't one of the cemetery workers because all of their vehicles were white, and this one was a darker color. I started walking faster, praying to my uncle to keep me safe. The truck followed me down the entire time, keeping pace with me. I couldn't see the person driving, but I just had this sick feeling in my stomach that they were watching me. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 to 10 minutes, it is a big cemetery, I get to the entrance and break into a run. The truck speeds up a little more. When I finally started seeing houses coming up on the side of the road, the person in the truck stopped and did a U-turn and headed back down towards the cemetery. I finally made it home, and the sick feeling in my stomach went away. I put the incident in the back of my mind until a week later when I saw an article in our local newspaper that my parents subscribed to. Apparently a few days after my run-in with that truck, a 12-year-old girl was walking around her neighborhood, which wasn't too far from where the cemetery is. Someone in a dark-colored truck with tinted windows started following her around and only sped off when she started running to nearby houses, banging on the doors and screaming for help until someone finally answered their door and let her inside. She didn't recognize the truck as belonging to anyone she knew or any of her neighbors. I don't know for sure what that person was doing at that cemetery. I don't know what might or might not have happened had I not noticed it when I did. But I will never forget that feeling of pure panic that suddenly overtook me in that moment. I have never experienced anything like it, and I hope I never experience it again. Some little voice inside of me was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, and I'm so glad that I listened to it. So, to set the scene, it's Halloween night in West Virginia. I was doing this thing called the Boo Fest, where everybody parades up and down the main street in their costumes and gets candy from the owners of the shops that are set up and down the street. It was pretty cold that night, and I was glad that my costume entailed a large amount of faux fur trimmings strapped and belted to various parts of my body under and over large strips of thick insulation foam. After making a circuit or two around the street and getting a small pouch of candy, I returned to my mother and brother, gave them the candy, and we headed off to our respective cars. While my mother and brother headed back home, I headed towards Harper's Ferry to spend the night at my friend's house. Halfway to the house, my friend texts me to cancel, so I pull off onto the side of the road in the pitch black of night and set the GPS to home, expecting to be back before 11:30. Strangely enough, the GPS decides to take me down the most convoluted path possible. Ordinarily, I wouldn't go down the anus of wherever I was to get to Route 9, but the roads were all paved and looked brand new, so I reasoned that I couldn't be too far down the wrong turn road. I'd taken off most of my foam and fur costume, so I was getting sort of cold. I cranked the heat, which in my family's Toyota van makes quite a loud noise. To drown out the noise of the fans, I turned on the radio. Just as a side note, if you like new rock music and live in the area around West Virginia/Maryland/Virginia, try listening to 101.5 Bob Rocks. I think they have an app too. I'm not sponsored, just a fan. So I'm tooling around in my car when I turn down this back road that looks to be a straight shot for a couple miles at least. I started down the road at 45 miles per hour, enjoying the late night drive. The only car I saw on that road was leaving it just as I turned onto it. After a short while on the road that couldn't have been more than a few minutes, something catches my attention. I'm not sure what it was, apart from this really slight tickle I felt at the back of my mind telling me that something was going on. I stopped whatever I was thinking suddenly and concentrated on what was going on around me. I felt more than I heard the noise at first. It was faint, and I shouldn't have been able to hear it over the sound of the fan and of the radio together. I turned off everything, and still, I felt only the faintest tingling of a sound tickling at my mind. The sound of the tires on the road and the engine almost suffocated it, seeming like a deafening roar when compared to the tickle. It was unsettling to hear something impossible like that. It got louder. It was now distinguishable as noise against the roaring of the engine. I can't describe to you what it was actually like to hear it, but it sounded like music. I would describe it as a mixture of calliope music and the sound of a little wind-up music box, all playing a sort of tinkling melody that reminded me of some sort of tune that would be played while someone recites an old nursery rhyme. As I drove farther and farther, the noise slowly got louder. As the noise grew louder, I drove faster to escape it. The faster I went, the farther I went, and the louder the noise got. You know how it goes. Eventually, it was as loud as if someone was playing the tune in the back seat of the van. I turned on the lights in the van and looked at the GPS. I don't remember how long I had left on the road, but I remember feeling like it was too long for the speed and the time I'd been going. Around this time, when it was comparatively loud, I passed the only house I saw on that road. The lights were all on in the house, and the music was loudest here, so they must have been playing it. The house was one of those small one-story houses with a mostly open square layout with large clear windows, so I could see through most of the house. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was my imagination or memory, but the house seems bare. The walls looked white and unpainted, I saw no furniture, and I saw no people, although somebody would have had to be playing that music. Tall pine trees hemmed in the entire road, creating an effective and slightly claustrophobic corridor. The only break in the tree walls was the house. I floored it past the house and down the last few miles of the road. I came off the road just under a Route 9 overpass. I pulled off to the side and took the chance to text my mother that I'd be home by whenever the GPS told me I'd be. I floored it down 9, the tune still echoing in my head. I go over that road regularly now, since one of my friends lives there. Done it once or twice at night since then, but never had anything crazy like that happen again. I still can't find that exact house, though. Somebody randomly appeared in the forest during my walk, carrying duct tape and watching me. I think I avoided something really awful. So, there's a small forest near my house, probably about 200 meters by 200 meters, almost a square. There is a country road along one side that farmers use, and there are smaller roads leading into the forest, which divides it into 4 sections. It's somewhat secluded. There's a main road next to it, but hardly any cars pass. One part of the forest, the back left section, has always creeped me out, ever since I was a kid. The rest of it feels fine, but that one area? Something always felt wrong. Anyway, last year, 2024, I was walking along that part of the forest. I was a teenager and walking alone, the place is safe to take walks and all that. I live in Slovenia. The path curves a bit, so you can't see too far ahead. I turn a corner, and suddenly there's a man right in front of me, about 6 meters away. I didn't hear him coming at all, no footsteps, no rustling, nothing. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. He was an adult man, definitely not in his 20s or 30s, he was older. I immediately thought, oh my gosh, he seems like a strange adult man. I am a girl, I need to watch out. I didn't turn my back to him. I just kept walking, super aware of where he was. I looked back, and he was staring at me. I told myself, if he starts walking toward me, I'm sprinting straight into the field next to us. Eventually I turned forward again and didn't see him anymore. I assumed he just walked away. But something felt off, so I looked again, and he was in the forest itself, not on the path. He was walking through the woods, in a section people don't usually walk in, especially not during spring/summer when it's full of underbrush. He was walking in the direction I had come from, and he was holding a roll of duct tape. It was the thick, gray kind of duct tape that every dad seems to have for some reason. I stared at him. I didn't want to lose sight of him. It felt extremely wrong and creepy. Who the hell brings duct tape into the forest and hides in the trees? And he walked back into the forest in my direction. Towards a teenage girl. Then, a little while later, he shows up again, this time riding a small electric scooter that he literally had in those same bushes, like he came back with duct tape and looked at me. I was looking at him, and then he went back and came back with a goddamn scooter. I was heading back by then, and I knew there was no way I was letting him be behind me. I pretended to tie my shoelaces until he went far enough. He rode off in the opposite direction but kept stopping and looking back at me as he went. There are fields around, so it was very visible where he was after he drove off. I was beyond creeped out. The whole thing felt like a horror movie setup. A teenage girl was alone in the woods, while a creepy man hid in the trees with duct tape. I can't stop thinking about how bad that could have turned out if I hadn't been alert. I didn't report it at the time, I don't remember if I even had my phone, and I was so focused on staying safe that calling the police didn't register. Initially, I thought, okay, maybe he is just going for a walk, but then I noticed the duct tape. Walking in bushes and trees, that's crazy. For some stupid reason I didn't tell my parents. I don't even remember what I was thinking, I just know that I didn't feel any fear, anxiety, or panic, like I was just very aware. Also, for some reason, I was thinking, okay, I'm overreacting or overthinking stuff, but I was thinking about it today, and I literally felt so much anxiety and like fear because God knows what could have happened. I am very thankful that I didn't have my headphones on this time, as I usually do. I'm not sure if that was due to my guardian angel or something else, but I truly appreciate it.
I was hiking with my mom and my dog. The paths were very muddy because it's spring. My hiking boots are coated in mud, and the bottom of my pants is splattered with it too. We come to this clearing by the river with a large tree overhanging. Standing there is an Asian couple, male and female. They look like young adults of indeterminable age. They are wearing pure white clothing and shoes. Not a speck of dirt or mud. Their bright white clothing and shoes were spotless. I was shocked and confused at how they made it to this point on the trail without getting messy. The plant growth on the sides of the trail before that point meant that you could not avoid the muddy trail. There are no alternate routes. It was like they were beamed down to that spot. Another odd detail is how my dog was drawn to the woman. My dog is not friendly and is quite wary of strangers. But my dog went right up to her without any prompting. After we continued on, I checked with my mother that she saw them too. It felt completely surreal. The scariest creepy experience I have had. This felt paranormal at the time, but I have no reason to believe it was anything but a series of consecutive false awakenings. Still, it was terrifying and left a paranormal taste in my brain. Note, I am 41. When I was in high school, I lived off and on in a house with my older brother and younger sister. It was my father's home, as my mother and father separated when we were younger. We could go there and live pretty freely, as our father would come by to make sure we had money for food and kept the bills paid. Once my older brother could drive, it became our refuge. The house had an entry room the size of a little living room with a long couch in it and a living room beside it, adjacent to the backyard. My older brother slept on the long couch in the entry room, and I slept in the living room on a love seat adjacent to the kitchen. One night, I remember waking up in the dark, terrified. The light switch was close, but I needed to stand to reach it. I lay there for a while before finally standing to turn on the light. Everything was fine. I lay down to go back to sleep with the light on. I woke again, in darkness, terrified. As before, I eventually stood and turned on the light. Once I was calm and less afraid, I fell asleep. This happened many times. Each time I was more afraid. I tried staying awake, and I tried to wake my brother. I even huddled up in a corner between the couch my brother was asleep on and the wall. It didn't matter. Eventually I woke up again, afraid on the love seat in the dark. One of the times I thought I woke up, there were things hanging from the ceilings that looked like stockings full of lumpy dripping masses. I didn't get up that time. I just lay there afraid until I woke up in the dark again. I have no idea how many times this happened, but it was really scary. The memories have faded with time, but back then, it was crystal clear. What the hell made my brain do that to me? In the hills, no one can hear you cry. This is actually my stepmom / her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I hope that sharing someone else's story will help me feel more comfortable sharing my own. My stepmother did not hold much affection for us, but she shared this story from her childhood with my sister, who is 3 years older, and me in order to deter us from making foolish decisions. This story served as a cautionary tale for my family. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a kind of privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved their family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, She befriended a girl named Lily who did not quite belong to Macy's typical social circle, popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff: hiking, fishing, and sailing. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her costly hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other cars there. This event was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily, begrudgingly, said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started complaining again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger's side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was when she realized what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger's seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16-17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a 1 on both of them. So they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack/log cabin looking place right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood and a giant axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back. Don't get out," and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exit the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me, and they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red/brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her shit, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point and just booked it off the side of the property in the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it, so he kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s. No cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours. When dark started to fall, all the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was exhausted and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. London, 1996-ish. When I was approximately 14 years old, my friends and I exhibited a rebellious streak and would often clandestinely leave our homes during the late hours of the night to socialize, taking advantage of the summer break from school. One such night, I was walking alone down a suburban street near my home at about 2 a.m. when a white BMW turned into the street, moving towards me. As the car approached me, it started to slow down. I wasn't a fan of that, so I quickly crossed the road to get a bit of distance between us. The car immediately sped up again. I didn't really think anything of it until I saw the driver's face. He was glaring at me as he passed with a look of pure rage. It creeped me out. It was a quiet night, and I heard the BMW reach the other end of the short street. There's a bus garage there and plenty of room to turn a car around, which is exactly what this guy did. The road also has one side street running off it, and I bolted down there the moment I realized the car had turned and was coming back towards me. There were plenty of cars parked in the side street, and I stood behind a van that was large enough to hide me from the road. Sure enough, I heard the car turn into the side street, and when I peeked around the side of the van, it was the same white BMW, moving very slowly. I caught a glimpse of the person's eyes unmistakably scanning the street, searching. That side street is an inverted P shape. The car turned and made its way down one arm of the P. I knew going back to the original road would expose me too much, and I could tell this guy was going to keep on searching until he was satisfied. A quick look around me revealed a graveled driveway between two houses. These are common in suburban London and generally lead to people's backyards or garages, so I guessed I'd be able to find a decent hiding place even if it meant scaling fences in my ridiculously unsuitable heeled sandals. I sprinted down there as best I could in those shoes, all the while hearing the low rumble of the BMW inching its way around the top of the P. At the end of the driveway were two small lock-up garages. One was locked, the other wasn't, so I creaked the very stiff door open just enough to crawl in and pull it to so I was hidden. There was a big tarp in there, so just for some extra security, I crawled underneath, although the crackling noise it made sounded as loud as gunfire to my scared ears. I crouched there for what felt like an eternity as the car rumbled up and down in the distance. I remember wondering why on earth the driver hadn't assumed that I lived here and had entered one of the houses, but I wasn't going anywhere until I heard him drive off. Then, to my absolute horror, I heard the engine get louder, and then a car door slammed. As the car idled at the end of the driveway, footsteps sounded on the gravel. I freaked out, wondering how the hell he knew I was there. Later I realized that he had simply spotted a potential hiding place he hadn't yet checked. The footsteps got closer and closer until they stopped right outside the garages. Luckily I'd managed to shut the door behind me so it didn't look suspicious, but at this point I was terrified that I would shake so much that I rustled the tarp and gave myself away. It seemed like hours but was probably only a few minutes before the guy gave up, walked back to his car, and drove off. I waited as long as I could bear before getting out of there, just in case. I don't know how long, but it was after 5 a.m. when I got to my house, which is just about 5 minutes away. I often wonder what could have happened that night. I was still 3 to 4 years away from getting my first phone, which might have made things go very differently. Creep in the woods. This is something that happened to me over a decade ago, back when I was still a freshman in high school. My family had just moved from the city out to the suburbs, and I was having a difficult time adjusting. As a result, I was quite the troublemaker. I was never a big fan of school. I was always a few years ahead of my classes, and as a result, I never really bothered myself with doing my homework or even attending my classes. More often than not, I would skip classes and simply go out to enjoy myself. On this particular day it was fairly cold outside, and there was a snowstorm coming in. I skipped out of school and was on my way home, not wanting to get caught outside in the weather. There was a shortcut that I sometimes took that led through a pocket of woods. It was very seldom that I did this, as I've always had an inexplicable fear of the woods. This time there was another person out there, leaning against a tree and smoking a cigarette. He was a very heavy person and appeared to be around the same age as me. For some odd reason he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt even though it was cold. Now, I wasn't a very social person, and I had no intention of saying anything to him. Unfortunately, as I walked by, he began to walk with me. I stopped and asked him what he was doing. He explained that it was cold outside and that since he couldn't go home at the moment, he thought he would just come with me wherever I was going. This was very troubling to me, and I tried to explain to him that he couldn't come with me and that his behavior wasn't okay. He seemed to accept it, and I continued on my way, making it home without incident. It snowed pretty hard that evening and night, leaving several inches on the ground. This is where things started to get weird. The following morning when my stepdad arrived home from work, he came to wake me up and asked me to come out to the front yard with him. When I did, I was startled to see that there were footprints in the snow leading from the sidewalk to the side of our house, stopping right under my bedroom window. Fortunately, since my room was on the second floor, no one could see inside. However, I was still upset about it. It was weird. The next night I was in my room playing video games. It was nearly midnight when something struck my window, scaring the shit out of me. I got up and looked outside and saw the kid from the woods staring up at me. At this point I went to get my brother, as I didn't want to go outside alone to confront him. We went outside, and the kid was still there. I asked him what the hell he was doing at my house in the middle of the night, and he said he thought we could hang out. I asked him how he knew where I lived, and he was quiet. I pressed him a few more times about it and finally got him to admit that he'd followed me home the day before. Then I asked him how he knew which room was mine, and his answer was terrifying. The previous night my whole family had gone out to the grocery store and to pick my younger brother up. While we'd been gone, he said he'd entered our house using the spare key hidden in the backyard. He knew my room because I'd changed, and he'd recognized the clothes I'd been wearing when I first encountered him. I asked my brother to run in and grab the phone and call the police, and this creep took off running. I wasn't about to chase him, so we just called the cops and told them the whole story about what had happened. The cop that talked to us knew exactly who this person was after we described him, and what he told us added yet another layer of terror to the story. I found out that this person was not a kid at all but a man in his mid-20s. He'd been accused of this type of behavior several times before and had even been arrested and charged several times for stalking people and for entering their homes without permission. I never saw the guy again, but there is one more thing that I believe belongs with this story. We had a family cat at that time, and shortly after this encounter, he went missing. We'd had him for years, and he'd never run off or even left our backyard when we let him out. The reason I say that this belongs as a part of this story is that a good friend of mine had also encountered this man before and had gone through a similar terrifying experience with him. Her cat had also gone missing around the time of her encounter with him. I'll never have any proof that this guy harmed our pet, and I don't believe that he was ever caught or punished over the report that my brother and I made. Years later, though, I saw an arrest record for him online. He'd been charged with several crimes. I can't put into words how thankful I am that my family and I made it out of that situation unharmed. This was a very sick man, and others that were unfortunate enough to cross his path obviously weren't nearly as lucky. My heart goes out to anybody that he did cause harm to and to anybody here that's had an experience similar to this. Stay safe, guys, and thanks for listening. My family has a cabin that we regularly visit every summer up in the North Woods. As a city kid, I was never used to how pitch dark it got at night. Lights go out, and you can't see your hand in front of your face, kind of dark. For bathroom runs in the middle of the night, night lights are essential. Up until we were teenagers, my sister and I would share the smaller room with twin beds. I always hated sleeping closest to the door because I liked to bury my face in the crack between the bed and the wall. I don't remember why, but this trip I was sleeping in the bed by the door, which was just across the hall from the bathroom. I've always been a restless sleeper and wake up a lot in the middle of the night. I woke while tossing and turning, and as I was positioning to face the door, I could see my dog sleeping on the hallway floor. Odd. This dog loved my father more than anything in the world. It seemed weird to me that she was not in my parents' bed because she was like his shadow, always underfoot. With the nightlight in the bathroom on, I could see that my mom was slowly petting the dog. She was hunched over her and continuously stroking her from head to tail. I assumed the dog had jumped out of their bed, and my mom was about to pick her up and bring her back to their room. I watched for a little but thought this seemed off. Why not just pick up the dog and go back to bed? I sat up and asked my mom what she was doing. She stops petting the dog and looks right at me. Even with the dim light coming from the bathroom behind her, the image of her is seared into my brain. I remember the pattern of her nightgown and how deep and black her eyes were, yet the rest of her face was blank. I could even see this woman's hair was a different color and texture than my mom's. We were both frozen until she started to stand up. The woman was staring at me as she got taller and taller but was still slightly hunched over the dog. She kept going up until she went through the ceiling and disappeared. I mumbled a profanity and saw my dog look up at me. My sister also woke up and asked me what happened. I told her it was nothing and lay back in bed. I was terrified but also had a feeling of peace. There was nothing I could do, but also whatever was there wasn't trying to harm me and probably had a soft spot for dogs. Woods of northern Wisconsin. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Checkmagon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the UP, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we have been to several national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail, like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote, and the only access is via logging roads. We plan to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. We made our way to our parking spot by driving slowly along the gravel logging roads. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, bunged-up pickup truck, complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rearview mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. Having parked and secured the car, we lifted our backpacks and embarked on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our dehydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. Upon reducing the fire to a mere heap of glowing embers, we made the decision to retreat back to our tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs. But that night, there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the sound of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent hearing the noise again. Our old tent had mesh windows, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal got at our food and garbage bag, which we left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it. Leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, they did not seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. At the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe/knife cuts where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting close to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield and a squirrel on the wiper. Hair and blood were still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear in the trunk, and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to a gas station by the nearest town, I removed the squirrel with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin.
When I was 11, a friend and I were walking back home after going into town for snacks, about a 3-mile walk. We got catcalled by grown men all the time. We would take bets on how often it would happen. The most it happened in one trip to town was 13 times. Mind you, we lived in a small, safe, Midwestern town, not some big, busy city. And we were just little kids. It was not cool. But this particular day, a truck full of guys in their 20s or so drove by us. They whistled. They hung out of the truck windows and made weird gestures. We ignored them, as we always did. But then they drove by us again. And again. They were trying to get us to get in their truck with them. For the entire walk home they'd drive by, make gross gestures, blow kisses, and try to wave us closer. Finally we got to the side of my yard and ducked in through some bushes. We thought we lost them, but then they came back again. We were home alone, and now they knew where I lived. So I did the only thing I could think of. I marched into my garage, got my BB gun off the wall, and marched back to the road. I waited and waited, thinking maybe they had left for good, but sure enough, here came the truck again. I lifted my BB gun, which looked like a regular rifle, to my shoulder and pointed it at them, following them as they passed by. Their faces dropped, and they sped off. My friend and I ran into the house and spied out the window for hours. They never came back. We were so scared. Stalked in the jungle. Years ago I traveled to the Central American country of Guatemala quite frequently. I owned a small import business, and I would go to various local markets to select and purchase Maya artwork, ceramics, and woodworks for shipment back to the States. After taking care of my business obligations, I would often stay another couple of weeks exploring the countryside and visiting the more remote locales. Guatemala is truly a beautiful country of active volcanoes, mountains, stunning vistas, vast rainforests, ancient Mayan ruins, and old Spanish colonial towns. To add to this beautiful mix, a very high percentage of the population are Maya Indians that still maintain some of their rich and colorful cultural heritage. Unfortunately, it also has its share of extreme poverty, shady characters, and desperate situations. I have many fond memories of my times in Central America and one memory that was not so pleasant. On one trip, I believe it was December 1991, I decided to travel to the northern part of the country in a region that is named the Petén. It is a very remote area, covering over a third of the country with, until recently, a tiny population. It's covered primarily in lowland subtropical rainforest and is filled with the remnants of the ancient Maya civilization. Tikal is one of the most famous ruins in the region, but there are literally thousands scattered throughout the forest. Many hundreds have not even been discovered under the thick forest canopy and thick undergrowth. To me, this area was and still is a magical and mysterious place, ripe for adventure and discovery. I decided on a hike that would take me to the ruins of El Mirador, near the southern Mexican border. It's one of the largest Mayan ruins and at the time was mostly unexplored. I found my way to the small village of Carmelita, where I could hire a guide that knew the jungle trails and the mules that would carry our gear for the approximately 75-mile round trip. We got on our way. The hiking was steady but leisurely, taking in the pristine environment and prolific wildlife. It was the dry season but still very hot and humid. Late on the second day of our trek north, we came upon a small group of 6 disheveled, hard-looking men that had set up what appeared to be a very temporary encampment. My guide, Carlos, was obviously surprised to see these men, and the men seemed not very happy at our intrusion. This was not an expected encounter. The camp consisted of a few blue tarps and supplies along with their horses and, I might add, a pretty good selection of various firearms. I had read previously that this area was known to rarely have, from time to time, a motley collection of various drug runners, human traffickers, illegal loggers, and looters digging in the ruins for priceless Mayan artifacts to sell on the black market, so I was obviously concerned. Here I was, miles and days from any settlement, a white gringo among a group of possible cutthroats and desperados. Carlos initiated a rapid flow of conversational Spanish that I could only partially understand. However, the main point of the conversation was that we wanted no trouble and that I was not an important person who would cause them issues if I were harmed, kidnapped, or robbed. The tension was thick, and the feeling was cold. The men were agitated and obviously sizing us up with cold eyes and sneers as several grabbed their rifles and machetes and told us in hostile terms to move on. We were only too happy to do so, but the day was late, and it was already getting dark. We turned on our flashlights and continued on for several hours in the darkness. Carlos didn't know these men, had never seen them before, and was distressed and upset. At the time my Spanish comprehension was not very good, but it was good enough to understand that our trip to the ancient ruins of El Mirador was over. He told me that these were malicious people with bad intentions, and he thought we were probably going to be followed. Maybe robbed of our provisions and his mules and possibly harmed. I can't begin to explain the terror of that night. Never have I been so scared. We got off the trail and moved maybe a mile deeper into the jungle, cut out a small clearing, and set up our hammocks. Carlos maneuvered the mules further into the jungle, ensuring their silence and potential to reveal our location. No sleep that night. We sat up listening, whispering, taking small comfort in our companionship and shared terror. Every sound manifested into the sound of footsteps closing in on us in the complete darkness and stifling humidity. Carlos had an antique pistol that he cradled in his palm. Not much of a defense against a group of 6 men with automatic rifles and sharp machetes. We started moving again before dawn. Carlos said we would have to cut through the forest and stay off the trail until we got closer to his village of Carmelita. The hiking was intense and nerve-wracking, but at least we were moving toward safety. We didn't stop, we didn't eat, and we moved continuously until we reached a small clearing and homestead. It was a family that he knew, and we spent the night there. Carlos and his friend discussed the event throughout the night. They were speculating on who these men might be and the probability they might have followed us to the homestead. They both stayed vigilant while I curled up in my hammock, surrounded by his 4 curious children, completely exhausted from the forced march with frayed nerves and an empty stomach. I couldn't eat, my stomach was in such knots. We never knew if they tried to follow us. But the next day we finally reached the safety of Carmelita, and my first adventure in that part of the Petén came to a favorable ending. I was hiking alone up a large cliff in the woods in the early hours of the morning while on a family trip just below the Canadian border. An old couple stood at the top of the cliff, over an hour from the start of the trail, without any hiking supplies. They kept trying to goad me into getting closer to the edge and to give them my phone for a photo. One plucked it from my hand and tried getting me to pose near the cliff. As a 16-year-old girl, having an old guy present and talking to me at all was unsettling, even if he had a woman there with him, especially since they both were weirdly interested in getting me closer to the cliff. They kept trying to have one talk while the other moved to casually stand between me and the trail back. There wasn't any cell service. The drop behind me was several hundred feet straight down to northern wilderness. No trails, just woods. A girl my age had been attacked by a bear just a week before. It is not a safe place to fall, die, or become trapped. I stayed several paces away from the cliff and said I was fine where I was and that I promised my mother I'd be careful. I pointed to the walkie-talkie on my backpack and explained that she had already radioed me a few minutes earlier, informing me that I was late returning to help clear our campsite and reminding me that I had agreed to be back within the hour. The walkie-talkie was nearly dead, and my family wasn't even awake yet. I'm not skilled in lying, but something felt extremely dangerous, and something let me act far better than I normally could. I braced myself with an arm around a nearby tree, smiled with well-faked cheer, and said I was ready for the picture. She pulled a face and tried once more to egg me closer to the cliff but reluctantly snapped a photo. The walkie-talkie didn't have the range to reach my campsite, but when they asked about the model, I cheerfully explained that it was a newer one covering over 20 miles. I also mentioned that, although it was a bit bulky, the sound quality when speaking with my mom was really clear. Something seemed convincing enough to have them reluctantly step slightly away from the path. I smiled, carefully staying on the side with trees behind me, and darted forward, snagging my phone with a yell, "Thanks," and fake friendly wave as I rushed between them back down the trail. They might have been perfectly nice, many strangers I'd met on the trail were. But the vibes from this one specific couple were rancid, and my instincts screamed that I was being sized up and hunted. No other strangers felt anything like it. Paranoid or not, I made it back to camp alive, with my phone, and didn't go hiking again until our next campsite at a different park several counties over. With my pepper spray in my pocket, just in case, for bears and other predators. Last Friday, I was mountain biking on some trails in the woods around 30 minutes or so from my house. I was with a couple of friends, but when we ride around, we sometimes get separated, but we usually find each other or regroup in a couple of spots. Anyway, I was riding around, and I realized that none of my friends were behind or around me. I was slightly nervous because it was pretty cloudy, and it felt like it was going to rain soon, and this caused the woods to be a little darker than usual, but I carried on. There's this little body of stagnant water in a clearing in the woods, and I came upon it. It was eerily quiet, and this wave of terror came over me like I'd never experienced before. I looked across the clearing to the other side of the pond and saw a figure that looked like a deer circling something that I couldn't quite make out in the dark. The deer-like figure then raised its head and looked in my direction, and the feeling of terror got even worse. I was paralyzed and couldn't help but stare in its direction. Then, the figure got up on two legs and hobbled back into the woods. I couldn't believe what I had just seen and rode away in disbelief. I didn't discuss the event with any of my riding buddies or my family, but I've been terrified ever since. I can barely sleep at night, and I keep thinking about the image of that thing running into the woods. I consider myself to be pretty calm and rational in most cases, but now I find myself doubting everything. I'm uncertain if my imagination was deceiving me or if the events I witnessed were real. I decided to pose this question to you guys here to see if anyone else has had a similar experience. A creepy dude in the woods wouldn't leave me alone. So I live in the PNW, which has a huge number of excellent campsites. A personal favorite of mine is not a designated campsite but rather a forest road situated alongside a river. Being a moody young woman, I would frequently make sojourns in my dumpy Toyota Camry to this one spot so I could be alone on the river and meditate on whatever was bothering me. Camping alone as a 20-something female often inspired anxiety in both myself and my folks, but I didn't let that deter me. Camping alone was something I genuinely enjoyed doing, and after experiencing a series of emotional misfortunes, I needed the time to myself. The last time I ever went to this particular spot, I must have been around 21. I had just had a closure conversation with someone who broke my heart some months prior and wanted to take some time to process that. Luckily enough, I had gotten consecutive days off from my retail job, so I packed up my car and made the 3-hour drive to the spot. This spot is fairly well known, and often a few other campers would be there on weekends, but during the week it would more than likely be empty. By the time I arrived, it was late afternoon, and I was slightly disappointed to discover a turquoise Chevrolet truck and another silver car parked closest to the river. I parked some distance behind them and began unloading my things. Two young gentlemen were hanging out by the truck, and as I passed by, they greeted me. I muttered a hello and kept walking. I picked a spot I thought was nice and went back to get the rest of my things. As I was passing their cars again, one of the men, the shorter, stockier one, rushed to a boulder near the path where some pistols, I later learned they were air pistols, were sitting and quickly concealed them, saying, "Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to scare you." There was something childlike in his manner, like he did this specifically so I would pay attention to him. I told him it was fine, I wasn't scared and kept walking. I unloaded the rest of my things, set up my camp, and got a fire going. I was tired after the long day of driving and hauling my stuff around, so I plopped down in a camp chair and got some chili mac cooking for dinner. It was a beautiful evening, not too hot, and golden hour on the river is always a fantastic thing, so I was thoroughly enjoying the moment. I could see the two men swimming upriver a bit, but it was easy enough to ignore them. By the time I finished eating, they passed by my camp on the opposite bank and were walking into the woods. I went down to the bank to get water for my dishes and heard the stockier one call out to me. "Hey. I just wanted to let you know that I'm a good guy, okay?" Maybe this should have alarmed me more, but it didn't. I thought the guy was socially inept but left my judgments at that and elected to answer with a polite okay. I wanted him to leave me alone and thought that if I was nice but uninterested, he'd take the hint. This was a demonstrably ineffective approach. Some time had passed, and I had been musing over the last week's events and just generally enjoying the beauty around me when he came limping up to my camp. He was doing a feigned grunt as if he was in pain. I don't exactly remember the exchange we had, but he wound up sitting at my camp and explaining to me that he had had some injuries in the past that were adversely impacted by the cold of the river. Before I proceed, I must admit that in my younger years, I tended to be quite passive, particularly when interacting with strangers. I've definitely had to practice setting and maintaining boundaries as I've gotten older, and this instance demonstrates the danger of failing to do so. I kick myself every time I tell this story. I'm uncertain if telling the guy to leave me alone, as a young, pretty girl in the woods, would have been effective, but I regret not expressing my thoughts more clearly that day. All that said, given some previous experiences, I had taken on a policy of engaging in active listening with others who seemed to be struggling. I obviously was faced with my woes and wanted to be treated compassionately, so I aimed to do the same with others. It was clear the guy was having issues and, by all exterior judgments, seemed like he was down on his luck, even with some maladaptive tendencies. He continued to stay at my camp and began telling me all about his life. These stories were pretty fantastical, the kind of lies a child would tell you of some incredible adventure or grandeur. As they went on, they entered weirder and weirder territory. He explained that the aforementioned injuries that were paining him were the result of falling a great distance while on a welding job, where his hand was caught by being impaled by a piece of rebar. He described his heroic effort of self-preservation by unhooking himself from the rebar and falling the rest of the distance, breaking his legs or something like that. I just gave him a series of yeah, uh-huh, and oh wow, that must have been painful. He revealed that he was recently homeless after splitting up with his girlfriend, who had been talking to another guy. That's why he was staying here in his truck, the aforementioned Chevy. He also mentioned that he worked as a DJ at a venue in the nearest town, where he earned a significant amount of money. He increased his exaggerations by telling me he was also a 5-star chef and enlightened me on a gross-sounding dish of his creation that was essentially a soup made from watered-down fruit jelly and some other sweet things. He also told me that he had once been a Navy SEAL, specializing in small arms. At that moment, he revealed to me that the pistols he believed had scared me earlier were actually air pistols, and he enhanced his story of being in special forces by demonstrating some twirls with one of them while showing me what ultimately turned out to be mediocre marksmanship. At a later point, he wound up giving me one of them because it made him think of doing bad things. I hesitantly accepted it. At this point, I felt a sense of unease and desired the man's departure, yet I lacked the courage to refuse him. Unfortunately, as the evening wore on, he just continued to get weirder and weirder. By this point, he began bringing his belongings from his truck and setting them around my camp. This was a process that happened gradually, each new conversation note eliciting a new show and tell idea. I can't remember all he brought down, but it included his guitar and a lot of other stuff. He tried to give me some of it, but after the air pistol, I declined. The conversation dragged on, eventually with him telling me, in detail, about some childhood traumas. His father, who had been in the military, was very strict. He also told me about his cousin who had hurt him, which he described to me in detail. He got really close to me when he told me this, looking me square in the eye, unblinking. "And that's why I'd never hurt you," he said, still staring at me. I shit you not, my skin started to crawl. I had a few things to defend myself with, a hunting knife and some bear spray, but he hadn't done anything directly threatening yet. Not long after this, his ex-girlfriend showed up. He introduced me as his friend, and they talked a little bit before he ignored her in favor of me. The whole thing made me even more uncomfortable. She didn't stay long and sped away in her truck, I'm assuming in some fit of jealousy. What did I do to deserve that? I didn't say anything other than I was going to bed, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. He said he needed some alone time himself, and I thought I had lucked out. I went into my tent to bed down for the night as it had gotten dark, only to discover that a cheap ring had been left on my pillow. He must have placed it there when I stepped away to go to the bathroom or something. Furthermore, I could hear him still wandering around my campsite. I peeked out of my tent, and he had his head in his hands as he paced and was muttering to himself. A powerful feeling of needing to flee came over me. There was no way I could stay there. Even if he didn't do anything to hurt me, he at minimum would annoy me the whole 3 days I planned to stay. I immediately started to pack my stuff, and when he asked what I was doing, I told him I was just going to go. Since I was car camping, I had a bit of stuff with me that would require a few trips, and I hurried to get it all in my car. On one trip up the path to the parking area, he stood in the middle, complaining that my flashlight was blinding him. I didn't say anything and stepped around him. I took most of my trips after that unbothered, though I went with one arm free so I could carry my hunting knife and be ready in case he tried to get physical with me. On my second to last trip down, he came out of the dark from the direction of his truck. He was sobbing and cried, but I didn't do anything wrong. I flat out ignored him and ventured down the path once more to grab what I could and hightail it to my car. I wound up leaving a cord of wood behind, not seeing it as worth the danger of going back for it. I shut all my doors and hopped in, absolutely elated at the sound of my 30-year-old car starting right up. I got the hell out of there and drove the 3 hours back to my house. I didn't have reception until about halfway through the drive, at which point I called my mom and told her what happened. She was upset that I didn't tell her where I was going. I told my dad and stepmom, whom I lived with at the time, and that she was glad I was okay. When I returned home, my stepmother asked why I was back, and I explained the situation again. My dad later suggested I get a gun if I wanted to continue solo camping in case something like that happened again. The next day, I went out to my car so I could drive to meet some friends and found my tire had gone flat. What an immense stroke of luck it was that it didn't happen at the campsite or somewhere else in the mountains where I didn't have reception. I'm in my mid-20s now and moved to the city about 6 months ago. My roommate and best friend discovered the air pistol while he was helping me move. He knew I didn't own any guns and was immediately confused, thinking it was real. When I asked myself about it, I laughed and explained what happened. I haven't been back to that site since, and while I'd definitely bring a friend there, I probably won't go alone again. Dark house in the woods. In the early 80s, when I was 8, my family was visiting my uncle, who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this or that. One night while we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling, because, bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, 6 and 14, and I'm female, stayed home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night, so the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went looking for you. Again, all of the lights were off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it, and 2, if you were extremely lazy, and I'm sure by now you can guess which one of us met those standards, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there's a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight of the lightning, I see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face as if he were trying to peer in and looked exactly like the stereotypical creepster, heavy-set, scraggly beard, etc. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw, but then Ben sternly whispered, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I croaked out, "And I'm here." Right as there was another flash of lightning. Creepster was still there but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking toward the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let Creepster know that people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know, and tell me, what to do. He asked me to go lock the other doors and was yelling for everyone else to come out and to lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up until this point extremely clearly, then I remember the end very clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we've talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben, in a very calm but firm voice, say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain." So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear and Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw Creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle's party line was malfunctioning, possibly due to the storm or because a neighbor had left it off the hook. For the record, they are the only people I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know what that is, in really rural areas, multiple people on the street would actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I vividly remember Ben putting me on phone duty and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window on the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun, and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming, but he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was definitely no police involvement, though. We just went on with our trip. But we never played vampire again without some mention of that night. Let me tell you about my old house. We saved for years for the down payment. It was a cute little white house, just big enough for the two of us. We knew the previous owner had passed away there, but it didn't bother either of us. We'd joke about it being haunted. When junk mail showed up addressed to Lillian, we decided that would be the ghost's name. It was all a game. The back door still had a skeleton key lock. We only had one key, so we kept it in the lock. Every night, we'd close and lock the door. I had to brace it with my knee to get it to latch. Every morning, the door would be unlocked and standing open. We started leaving the key on a nearby shelf, and it didn't happen after that. There was a fluorescent light mounted in the bathroom that didn't come on right away unless it was very warm. When my husband complained of finding the light on in the mornings, I stopped using it because I was flipping the switch and then forgetting to turn it off. But I later found out that he meant the actual overhead light. I was definitely not leaving it on. You could sit on the couch and watch the light come on, even though you couldn't see into the bathroom. It lit up the hallway. After several minutes, it would go off. This would repeat for hours at a time. Electricians were called, but none could find any issue. One suggested power surges but couldn't explain why nothing else was ever affected. There were 2 bedrooms, and each had a smoke/carbon monoxide monitor. The one mounted outside the spare room had a robotic voice that would tell which had triggered it. It would often go off in the middle of the night, stating that carbon monoxide had been detected. The fire department came several times but found nothing and declared the alarm faulty. They even replaced it for us. The new alarm did not speak and never went off. Then the talking began. The first night we heard it, we thought someone was in the house. But no one was there, and there were no close neighbors. We couldn't find the source. It sounded like a woman having a conversation in the next room. This happened once or twice a week, and we learned to ignore it. The poking was more disconcerting. Imagine waking up to someone poking you in the side, except the only other person in the house is next to you, dead asleep, and on the opposite side. My husband would work in the basement and constantly have someone poke his side or tap his arm. It only happened to me at night. I kept the door to the basement locked, especially when I was there alone. I'd often hear heavy footsteps come stomping up the steps. Sometimes they stopped at the door, sometimes they continued into the house. I'd hear them go into the kitchen, but no one was ever there. I've sat in the living room and listened to the sound of someone driving nails in the basement. There was never anyone there. I finally stopped investigating. I doubted my sanity for a long time, even after my husband corroborated everything. Thankfully, there were eventually other people who heard and saw the same things. We moved after 3 years. The house is for sale, but everyone seems to get a bad feeling from it. I worry it won't sell. Anyway, that's my story. The creep in the woods. I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together there were 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it might be dangerous since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing grounders when we arrived. which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, one person is it, the person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment to tag them. But there's a catch: if someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, they are then tagged. Yeah, I know it's a pretty childish game, but it's fun. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking and joking around when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group and looked over at my best friend to ask if she heard the noise, while everyone stared at me as if I had 10 heads. She asked what I meant, and I told her it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us. She responded with the classical "ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have excellent intuition, and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, I obsessively stared down the area behind the fence, which was all woods beside the houses on the left and right of the playground, in paranoia. I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of trees. At first, I thought it might just be a car headlight coming down the street that connects to the park, as you can vaguely see the headlights of oncoming traffic through the trees. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me, as we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up along the side of the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some baggy and dirty white sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on, but we all collectively agreed it was strange since he seemed, a guess from his clothes, to be at least in his mid-20s and just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride or was just resting for a moment, so we tried to brush off the fact he was sitting and so intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to our group. He went from sitting on the one swing furthest away to the next swing, a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was just about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us have noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off of the playground equipment, and in pairs of two, we walked down the stairs on the side furthest away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure until we neared the end of the street. He got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continued to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stayed hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took but also starting to sprint towards us, screaming "You mother duckers and I'll ducking end you." At this point the whole group bursts out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was urging each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her. So I ran back by her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like deep breaths, "You got this, come on, we have to go now." This whole time, the man was still running/screaming behind us and catching up quickly. At this point both I and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace she could keep. Luckily this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if even that much, and as we all piled in through her garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German Shepherd lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after him. Luckily her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark lamp-lit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But most comforting of all was our big fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back.
I was on a cross-country road trip from Ohio to Oregon, helping my best friend, B.F., move, with one of our other friends at the time, R.M., helping as well in another car. We didn't reserve lodging in advance because we thought we would just drive as much as we felt we could handle and pick a place to stay.
One of our requirements was that the place have a pool because we all like swimming, and it helps us relax a little on the way. This will be important later. We crossed over into Utah, and after some harrowing weather events none of us knew were possible, could be a story in and of itself, we were pretty exhausted. This was before any of us had smartphones, so we saw a road sign for a motel with a pool. Score. We thought. We found the place, and I dropped B off at the lobby entrance to get us set up with a room while R and I parked the cars. The first thing I noticed was that there were people poking their heads out their doors and standing in front of the rooms as though they actually lived at this motel and we were new neighbors moving in. Strange, but I ignored it to try to find a space. I got one next to what looks like a garage. I get out and start walking toward the lobby. I get to a point where I can see the garage more fully. There is a massive glass window in what looks like a garage with a concrete floor. On the concrete slab were a couple of beach chairs, towels, some toys that were made to play in the sand with, and a blue hard plastic kiddie pool. Yes, dear readers, this was the advertised pool. The sign had a full-sized pool in it, but whatever, I was tired and just needed sleep at this point. Gawking at the pool held me up long enough that B was already walking toward me with the room keys. R was still having trouble finding a spot, so B hands me a key so I could check the room out while she helped him find a space. I opened the door without a problem and tried to flip on the light. Nothing. I feel my way through the dark room and find a table light. Nothing. I was still feeling around, and I heard a strange sound but couldn't place it. I finally find a light over the second bed, and the room is illuminated for the first time. The room was clearly very dated with floral sheets, curtains, wallpaper, and lampshades, all different. What seemed to match, though, was what looked like dried blood stains on the sheets, lampshades, and wall that very much looked like arterial spray. If this happened in the past, they sure as hell lined the sheets and everything up perfectly again after washing them. Amidst my horror, I recalled hearing a noise coming from the bathroom, which I could now see clearly. The bathroom door is closed. I go to open the door, and some creature the size of an opossum scurries quickly past me and out of the thankfully still open door outside. I don't know exactly what it was, but I was not interested in finding out what it was or what else might be in that bathroom. I noped right the heck out of there, and I was absolutely done with this place. I left the room and told her to stop looking. We were not staying here. I told B what I saw, and her face went from confusion to horror to anger. It was time for B to put on her Karen wig and get our money back, and I didn't feel at all bad about sicking her on this place. I followed behind as she stormed back into the office. As I survey this lobby, I am listening in on the conversation. It was about 3 a.m., and the free breakfast was sitting on a counter. It is a plastic contraption with 2 compartments for cereal that dispenses a small amount at a time, similar to a candy dispenser. The part that scares me more now that I have had food safety training was the milk that was just sitting out on the table next to the cereal dispensers. Unrefrigerated. At 3 a.m. How long was that out? B successfully got a refund after having to argue for a while. They would rather not give up on this money, and after everything I saw, maybe it was rare that they got new customers. I still wonder what I would have found in that bathroom if I wasn't too scared to look, but I think I got scared well enough with what I did see. I was so scared, my adrenaline gave me the push to drive completely through Utah until we got to the next state. I will still never stay in Utah or even drive through it if I can help it. 'Tis cursed. Creepy hike in the woods. I'd like to introduce myself a little bit before I tell you what happened and how I got into this situation. I'm 29 years old and live in Switzerland, where I work as a cop. Basically it's like 911, someone calls, then dispatch sends us for all kinds of interventions. Sometimes, things you see in that job change your perspectives of what's normal. You meet all kinds of people and sometimes weird places too. But in general, my country is safe, and I almost never carry my gun home, unless I go training at the shooting range. Also, and because it's linked to my story, I love music and driving cars. It helps me clear my mind and makes me feel good. Some time ago, I met a club of car enthusiasts, and from time to time, we meet and do little road trips across the country. I'm also a very chill and calm person, and I always try to find a peaceful solution to anything, especially at work. I try to always see the good in people, and I prefer talking to them. Okay, here starts my story. Last year, 2022, I went on a road trip with a nice guy I met through the car club. Let's call him Robert to keep anonymity. That trip was really cool, and we drove almost all night, felt like playing NFS, which was great because the lights of cities look beautiful at that time, and I'm more of a night owl. After that trip, we said we'll stay in touch to make another trip someday. Weeks passed when suddenly I got a message. Hi, it's been a while. How are you? Still up for a little trip? Tell me when you're free. When I saw the message, I directly checked my schedule and found a free day. I sent him back, hey. Yeah, sure. I'm free on. Let me know if it works for you too. He answers, okay, works for me too. Where do you want to hike? Then I was confused. Why is he talking about hiking? I checked the message again and noticed it was written by another Robert, too, from my contacts list. Not only did I mistake the dudes by their names but also because their profile pictures on WhatsApp looked alike. The guy that contacted me was an old acquaintance I met through some of my friends when I did some DJ set parties. It was a few years ago, and we were both passionate about the same music. Then from time to time we bumped into each other at concerts. So I had just planned a day with this guy I mistook for someone else. I felt bad and didn't want to cancel because although it wasn't the person I thought, that guy was nice too, and it's been a while since I went for a hike in the woods or the mountains. So I was like, yeah, why the hell not? Then, we started planning the hike. I didn't want something too challenging, so I made a proposition. I knew a nice hike that goes through the woods and mountains, the views are beautiful, and you get to meet hikers here and there. Also, the path has multiple campfire spots, where you can grill some sausages. Robert, too, agreed and asked me if it's okay for me to take him to the train station, and I'll leave my car in the parking lot next to the woods. The day of the hike, I arrived at the train station, where Robert, too, was waiting for me. I looked through the place and couldn't find him. Then he waved at me. Here, I got my first red flag. The guy I knew and saw in his profile picture looked different. It was Robert, too, but he looked sloppy, he grew long hair and had a beard. I charged up his bag in my trunk, and we moved. During the ride, I noticed that Robert, too, smelled bad. It's the kind of odor I smell on the job when I'm confronted with homeless people or drug addicts. But I noticed he came well equipped for the hike, which means he wasn't in a no-money situation. So I decided to not judge him because of his body odor and to ignore it. Besides, we'll be in the woods, so outside I wouldn't notice that. We stopped at a shop near the woods to get some fire starters, and that's when Robert asked me if I was up to changing the hike because he knew another location close to the one I had chosen that had some nice spots for pictures. We both carried good cameras. I'm good with a map, and I checked it on my special app. The hike was the same length as mine, but it went near a river, which I found really nice. Okay, let's go check that. Finally, we parked my car and arrived at the forest. I saw some old barns there and little fields for cows. Our little trip started. During the hike, I was questioning Robert about his life and catching up on time. I already knew he was a smart guy who went to engineering school, but I learned he moved out from our city and found some job at a construction company where he does all kinds of calculations to build stuff. Then the more I learned about his life, the more I felt something was odd. Robert started telling me he has a girlfriend, but they are going through some hard times, and he thought she might leave him soon. Then he continued saying that he missed some days at work because he felt depressed and because he wasn't sure it pleased him anymore. He said he might get fired. I was trying to cheer him up and keep him focused on good stuff and advised him to consult if necessary. He asked me about my job and how I react to dangerous people and stuff like that. I wasn't reassured by all this conversation, but I always get all kinds of questions from people, so I can't say I was shocked. Furthermore, during the walk he sometimes looked a bit off, like a robot. At some point, near the river, we found what looked like ruins from an old mill, around 1920 to 1880, I'd say. It was a cool spot, and I took a pic or two. But we didn't see any people on our path, and the sky got cloudy, and it started to rain a bit. Luckily, I was well equipped. I carried everything you need in this kind of place: water, food, fire starters, first aid, and a knife. We kept moving until we found a campfire spot with a wooden table. We decided to stay there and eat. I asked Robert to get some wood while I set up the table and looked for little branches to maintain the fire. Robert puts his bag on the table and starts to show me tools he got with him. He grabs a big handsaw, puts it on the table, and then takes out 2 knives. One of them was really big. Switzerland's law is permissive regarding knives, in my opinion. I was surprised to see this kind of knife because it's a 3-hour hike, and we're not staying there for the night, nor hunting something. So I decided to pull the knife from the holster attached to my belt in order to gather branches. Robert looked at me, and then he said something in a surprised tone that froze me to the bone. "Oh, you took a knife too?" Immediately, my mind started racing. What does this mean? Why wasn't I supposed to get a knife when we planned to go into the woods and make a campfire? Robert suddenly leaves to get what I asked him for, and I get an uneasy feeling. It's like my whole body was in alert mode, telling me something is going on. I used to be around dangerous people at the job, but it's different when you're working fully equipped: bulletproof vest, gun, pepper spray, and you're with your partner in the situation I was in right now. I mean, we were alone in the woods, and we didn't see anyone on the path. From that moment, I decided to keep both my eyes on Robert and keep him in sight all the time, especially his hands. That's what you learn at the police academy. People always use their hands to do harm. Moreover, I decided to keep a minimum distance in case he tries to do something. A few minutes later, Robert comes back, puts all the branches he grabbed from trees down, his knife still in his hand. He looks straight at me and just stands there. Suddenly, he said, "I'm sorry." His tone felt empty of emotions. Immediately I got up and looked at him. I was sure he was going to run at me and try something awful. I got a rush of adrenaline. Then he started to mumble something I could barely understand. "We're both here in the woods. Alone. We got knives. I'm sorry. What does he mean? Why does he act so weird?" Then Robert continues, "Let's hug." My body gave me even more alerts. Why does he want to get close to me while he is holding a knife in his hand? Is he trying to do something bad? Why would I hug him out of nowhere? Then my mind told me I've got to get out of this situation quickly but without making him suspicious. I wanted to leave this place and go home. I finally replied, like nothing happened, "No worries, man, let's make that fire and eat something so we can get home before getting completely wet." But I would rather not get close to Robert. I asked him to get more branches because the ones he got me were wet. I took the rain as my opportunity. After he came back, I told him the fire starters didn't work well in the rain, and it might be a better option to pack our stuff and head back to the parking. He first looked skeptical and disappointed but agreed. We packed everything and left the place. I didn't want to talk to him on our way back, but I didn't want him to notice something was odd, so I just kept talking like nothing happened. From that moment, his tone changed a bit and seemed colder to me. I kept him in my sight. After all, we were still alone in the woods. He kept being very negative towards life and people. It made me think he maybe was suicidal in some way. I was happy I did not carry my gun that day because I was afraid he might try to do something because of that. Once we got back to the parking lot, where I finally saw people, he asked me if I could give him a ride. I refused to argue. I just got an urgent call from someone and needed to leave. After all that, I kept asking myself, was he trying to do something? Was he just afraid of the situation? Maybe it was odd for him, even though we knew each other and even partied together. Was he planning something? I mean, we were alone, in a place he knew better than me, and he was a really smart guy. All I can tell you is that I blocked him after that and decided to contact our common friend. I knew he was close to Robert, so I explained to him the whole situation. My friend told me that Robert was going through some depression and was feeling bad lately. I told him that I can't do anything legally to help him without his consent, but I advised my friend to call him and make him see someone. A few weeks after my friend had a discussion with Robert, and apparently Robert was open to seeing someone about his problems. Thank you for listening to my story. Please let me know what you think about all this. I'm still confused to this day. I may be forming my opinion, but I've observed numerous individuals exhibiting similar reactions to Robert, and I remain unconvinced. People often assume I'm fabricating this story when I recount it, but it's genuine and even featured on the local news. A few months before the 10-year anniversary/high school reunion for my graduating class, almost every single person from my grade, plus a few other select people, I'll get to this part in a bit, started receiving cryptic, vaguely threatening sounding letters in the mail, no return address. It always said the exact same thing, and the strangest part was that it was handwritten/not printed en masse. So literally, hundreds of people scattered all over the country were receiving unmarked letters with a card inside of them saying something to the effect of, "You can lie to others, but you can't escape your conscience." Creepy. It seemed to target my senior class, as the vast majority of the letters were sent to people in our grade. However, the few other select recipients I mentioned included random individuals from both years above and below us, including my sister. And weirdly enough, my parents got a card too. Everyone started freaking out. The reunion was almost cancelled, police were sent to the high school to keep guard, parents were informed, and the local news channels picked up the news and started airing stories on it. One day my mom calls me and says, "I think it's X being a kid who used to be one of my very good friends growing up. We were best friends in elementary school and kind of grew apart, but we were still on fairly good terms by the time we graduated high school." At any rate, it was a bizarre guess, but mom had her reasonings, sort of. Half of her reasoning was based on intuition, and the other half was based on who received the letters. She insisted that it had to be someone from my senior class, but since she, Dad, and my sister all received one, it had to be someone personally connected to me. I thought it was nonsense because there was no way this strange letter could be related to me. I hadn't done anything unusual in high school, I was quite ordinary, and I hadn't personally received a letter. However, later I realized that since I had just moved, if some creepy person tried to look me up on Google or Yellow Pages, my current address might not have been visible. So I could have received a letter? But I'll never know because I moved. Still, the whole situation seemed quite far-fetched to me, so I somewhat dismissed my mom's concerns, which I now regret. A few weeks later, a couple of news reports came out stating that they had caught the person and mentioned the state he was from. I then recalled that the same friend X, whom my mom had been discussing, had moved there after college. It was a super specific place. Freaked me out. Like a "what are the chances?" kind of reaction. Confirmed it a few days later in the text message group that included all my old HS friends. Someone mentioned that they knew X was the perpetrator because they'd heard news from someone who knew, and they heard there was a warrant or something for his arrest because he destroyed some public property when he was back in our hometown a while back. The local news channel had just come out with a report that mentioned that the creepy letter guy had done exactly that, been arrested for destroying public property. So, yeah. It was definitely X. I don't know what transpired after that. The reunion proceeded smoothly. I didn't go, but I heard that the person didn't show up. Sometimes I think about him and wonder if he's doing okay / what happened in the first place. I hope he's in a better mental place. Anyway, I feel guilty for dismissing my mom over it. Occasionally she guesses shit that seems almost impossible for her to guess, and it's eerie how spot on it is. Sister jokes that she's secretly a witch. House hunting, and went to view this lovely looking cottage on an open day. It looked a little neglected, with overgrown gardens and a wasp nest attached to one of the windows. There were plenty of people looking around. Everything was okay downstairs, but neither my husband nor I liked the house. It needed too much work. We went upstairs and into one of the bedrooms, which was completely empty. It had wooden floors and a door in the corner with steps leading to another exit, which was weird. It seemed to be the biggest bedroom in the house but wasn't being used. I suddenly got this really weird vibe like I shouldn't be in the room but didn't think much of it. We had a look in the smallest bedroom, which was made up for a little boy, blue walls, blue duvet. There were hand-painted words above the window. I can't remember exactly, but they were loving words from a mother to a lost child, something along the lines of "always your room, just as it was when you left." It was really sad. Went around the bathroom and suddenly had this overwhelming feeling to leave, so we did. I got in the car and burst into tears, and I felt so angry. It was the weirdest sensation ever, like these weren't my feelings, but as though I had picked up on the feelings of someone else. The sensation was as if someone had imposed their feelings on me, as if they were urging me to leave the house. I told my husband that it felt as if the house didn't want to be sold and that it carried feelings of sadness and anger from someone. I kept an eye on the house through the website for a while, and I don't think it was sold. I have never had such a strong, negative, uncontrollable emotional reaction to a house before. The experience felt uncontrollable and left me deeply shocked. Something evil attacked me. This takes place in my childhood house on Black Ranch Road. This is, by far, the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. I was about 15 when this happened. I was lying in bed, nodding off, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I was hit with this force of absolute fear. I have never experienced anything like this before. Sure, I've seen scary movies that spooked me, but this was such an intense and all-consuming feeling of fear and terror it made my blood run cold, and my heart felt like it stopped pumping. At the same time I felt that fear, a strange thought entered my head. "He's here" is all I could think. I was lying toward the wall when something pulled my body and turned me over onto my back. When I was on my back, I couldn't move my body at all, and all I could do was move my eyes. I looked over into the corner of my room and saw a tall dark figure standing there. I tried to scream so someone would come in and save me from this nightmare, but I could not move. Then, this weird thing happened. It was like all the air in the room got sucked out. I could feel the air tighten around me, squeezing my whole body. It's what I imagine being in a vacuum chamber set on high would feel like. Then, with a whoosh, all the air came back, and with it, a loud sonic boom. It seriously felt like a portal was being ripped open right there in my room. It was so loud I thought for sure someone would have heard it and come in to see what the hell was going on, but no one heard it. This boom happened 3 times, boom boom boom. It was like someone firing off a shotgun in my ear, that's how loud it was. At the same time I felt the air get sucked out. The creepy figure standing in the corner moved over to me and then slowly got down on top of me. It was sitting on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I know this thing sitting on me is real and not just a figment of my imagination because I had my hands folded on my stomach, and when it sat down on top of me, the pressure pushed my hands painfully into my stomach, preventing me from moving them. I could also clearly see the outline of this dark figure right in front of me. This went on for a few minutes. The thing continued to sit on me, and the air continued to be sucked out of the room only to return with a boom. Then finally, it all stopped. The thing was gone, and the booming noise was gone. I just lay there, wondering what in God's name just happened. I sat up in my bed and turned on my lamp. Throughout the whole ordeal, I was terrified, but after it ended and I turned on the lamp, I wasn't scared anymore. I knew what I had experienced was real and I was awake, but I didn't freak out after I sat up. I was weirdly calm. I turned off the lamp, lay down, and fell back asleep with no problem. I know that some people are going to say this was probably a nightmare, or it was sleep paralysis, but I know it wasn't. I have had sleep paralysis all my life, and when it's happening, I know it's happening. I think to myself, okay, you know you were asleep and you can't move, just wiggle your fingers and you will wake up. And it works. This was not sleep paralysis. I was 100% awake. Please, if anyone has ever experienced anything like this, please comment and tell me your story. Don't take the back roads. I've lived most of my life way out in the valley countryside of Ontario. Granted, it may not seem like much for an 18-year-old, but for me, it's the only place I can call home, and I take pride in knowing the entire area, despite its vastness, intimately. Adventures across the long, crisscrossing roads, pastures, and woods that made up the skeleton of my village were a common venture in my childhood. As a young kid, I had a habit of biking extremely far out in hopes of finding new places, and occasionally, my dad or one of my friends' parents would toss out bikes in their pickup and take us way out onto a back road and let us explore for a few hours. This was how many of us initially discovered that, along one of these rough gravel roads bordered by sparse woods, there was a dilapidated old shack situated approximately 20 meters from the trail. Honestly, I never thought anything of it, except for the fact that it was creepy. It had no windows to see inside, and I never went anywhere near it, but one of my friends at the time said that her older sister had tried to go in it and that the door was always locked. We all had better things to be curious about at the time than that anyway, so I quickly moved on, and it became nothing more than a mundane landmark of that area. Honestly, I had completely forgotten about it for a few years now. Except last Tuesday, I was coming home from one of my very late classes at my university, and I usually take the back roads I perused many years ago, as they're more straightforward and scarcely ever have any sort of traffic. As I drove down the gravel path that would wind along the side of the country and eventually take me to the next street I needed to turn onto, I noticed a faint glinting coming from within the trees up ahead, maybe about 100 meters from my car. A flashlight? I thought, but as my car came closer, I realized what I was really seeing. The light inside of the shack was on. I should mention now that in all of the nearly 13 years I've spent living in my area, I have never seen the door open, and I've never seen a light inside that shack, ever. Not even once. I must have driven past that shack probably almost 100 times in my life, but this was the first time I'd ever seen any sign of a person's presence having been anywhere near that thing. That, coupled with the fact that it was 10 o'clock at night and pitch black outside aside from my headlights and the faint, incandescent glow lighting up the doorframe up ahead, immediately filled me with what I can only describe as a weird sense of dread. Most people would find it difficult to remain unsettled by such a sight, and I am prone to being easily frightened. Fortunately, while my car approached the light, I was curious enough that despite the feeling in my stomach, I slowed down as I was about to pass, hoping that I could see what was going on inside, and this is probably the only reason I managed to spot the dark shape that burst out of the foliage on the side of the road, directly into my path. I wasn't going very fast at that point, but I still pounded the brakes rather hard in alarm, so my car came to a crunching stop on the gravel. For a moment, I was just perplexed and freaked out. What was that? Had I almost hit a deer or something? This far out in the country, a deer would have been the most likely and most reasonable assumption. But in the beams of my car I could see what had stopped me, a very tall, very lanky old man with scraggly and balding gray hair. Right away I got the impression that this man was very poor. He looked dirty and unkempt, and his clothes hung off of him. However, I'm generally used to seeing people who aren't that well off in my town, and I don't like to judge people right away based off of that sort of thing, so I was mostly just extremely unsettled over what the hell this guy was doing way out here and why he had walked out in front of my car. As I sat there confused, the old man came around to my window and knocked on the glass. Feeling my memories of stranger danger conversations with my parents kicking in, as old as those conversations were, I rolled down the window just a crack, only enough for someone to be able to hear me and for me to hear them. I was already creeped out enough as it was. Immediately, I had to say what I was thinking. What are you doing out here? I asked. In my peripheral vision I could still see the light from the shack, but in my mind's eye I wasn't really registering it anymore. I know it sounds stupid, but I should have made the connection immediately. However, I was still shaken by the realization that I could have run this guy over if I hadn't stopped in time, and as a new driver, that thought was terrifying. After a small pause, the man started talking to me. He had a thick, croaky sort of voice, and he spoke very slowly. "My truck. It's broken," he explained. Okay. I was also getting the feeling that he wasn't really all there, mentally. I didn't have to look around to notice there wasn't any truck on the side of the road, but I did anyway, turning my head around to confirm what I already knew. There was definitely no truck. Had he somehow driven it into the trees or something? As far as I could remember, and see, there wasn't enough space anywhere in them for a truck to fit through. What was the man talking about? While I was looking, it was honestly as though I could feel that he was watching me, and when I turned back, he was still leaning down to peer inside of my window at me. "Where? I don't see it," I blurted. I was definitely distrustful of this guy already. At first he didn't respond, and my nerves were only getting worse the longer we were alone out here. Then, he replied. "It's just up the road," he said, this while turning to point in that general direction with his finger. The lights on my car aren't exactly the greatest, but I could still see far enough that I really couldn't imagine where on earth this truck was supposed to be. I couldn't spot the faintest sight of it. While I squinted up ahead, he continued, "I'll show you where, if you come." At this point, I really had no idea what this old man was thinking I could do to help. I'm 18 years old, female, and very petite. I don't exactly look like the type of person who knows a lot about cars or how to fix them, and for the record, I'm really not. But I was tired from a long day at school, so I absolutely was not at my brightest, and for some reason, a part of me felt guilty about leaving him out here alone if his truck really was broken. "Okay," I said, and I reached for my gear shift to start driving slowly up the road, but as soon as he saw my hand, he shook his head. "Just walk, it's not too far." "What? Excuse me, but no thanks. How the hell was I going to see anything in the dark if I got out of my car and followed him, anyway?" There was no harm in driving wherever he was trying to lead me. The more I talked to the guy, the more unnerved I was getting, and the more red flags were starting to pop up in my mind. I couldn't see a car anywhere, and this total stranger wanted me to get out of mine and follow him into the dark on this creepy road in the middle of nowhere. I will admit I am a bit of a naive person, but I'm definitely not stupid. No, I'd rather drive to it," I responded. This situation really wasn't making any sense to me. I could see his brow furrow, and he looked agitated. He insisted, "Your car won't fit in the trees, anyway." So, did his truck crash, then? Why the trees, if we were going up the road? I remembered what I'd just been thinking a minute earlier about there not being enough space, and I asked him, "Then how did yours get in the trees?" The only logical explanation would have been that his truck had swerved off the road. But even if that were the case, there was seriously nothing at all that I could have done to help him fix his car or get it back out again. It genuinely made no sense at all to be asking me to come with him and help, and the entire situation was beginning to make me petrified. A lengthy pause occurred between my question and his response, leading me to think he might not have heard me, so I asked again. Still no immediate answer. When he finally did reply, he was staring at me directly in the eyes. I will have nightmares about it for a long time. It was so sudden, and the way he said it was just so unbelievable. "Creepy. You don't look old enough to drive." I hear comments like this a lot, since I do look very young because of my size. Normally somebody would say this with a smile or something to signify that this is, in fact, meant to be taken as a joke, but the guy's face didn't change even slightly. He just kept staring at me with a completely cold expression. The sheer inappropriateness of such a remark in that kind of situation immediately had my heart racing, and all I could think was, holy ducking crap. What did this guy want with me? What I wanted to say next was, "Who the duck are you?" But instead I anxiously fumbled for my phone in my pocket, babbling in a way that probably made it really obvious I was completely freaked out of my mind. Okay, I can just call someone to come help you out, there's not really anything I can do." As I said that, it occurred to me to wonder, did this old guy not have a cell phone of his own? I know not every older person has one even if they're becoming much more common, but seriously. And then I also remembered, with a sudden streak of massive fear, the shack with the light on. I could still see the light coming from it just up ahead in the trees, and my dumb brain finally put two and two together. The old man hadn't even mentioned it at all. It was as if he didn't even notice it, and the only person who could have turned the light on was the man standing outside my car right now. What was he doing out here in that shack, then, which had been locked for all these years by someone I never knew? There was definitely no truck around here. He wanted me out of my car for another reason. I think the old man noticed my terrified expression, realizing I was about to flee. Instead of any words, without warning, his face contorted with rage, and he swung his fist, pounding it against my window with enough strength to make it shudder. His eyes were wide, and he looked furious and completely ducking insane. Even though I was panicking more than I ever had in my life and I was sure he was about to smash the window in if he tried again, I screamed, threw my phone on the floor, switched gears, and slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. I hurtled down the road, and when I glanced into my rearview mirror, I saw his dark shape turn from standing in the road. And I watched as he turned, and he walked off the road, directly back towards the light of the shack. I didn't slow down at all until I was nearly home and absolutely sure that there was no way that he could have followed me. When I got home that night, I spent a long time crying about what had happened with my mom, and though I don't think she believed all of what I told her, we don't have the greatest relationship. She called up everyone she knew to ask if anyone knew the old man or if they knew who owned that shack. In a town like ours, just about everyone knows each other, but no one had any clue who he was. One of our family friends even swore that he was certain it had been abandoned for at least 4 years, and since most people don't usually take that road, no one except me has ever reported seeing a light on or the door open. I've been taking a different route home from school since, and I really don't think I ever want to head back down that road. Very unsettling encounter with a stranger at my door. This happened about 3 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still creeps me out. I, 21 at the time, had just moved into a new apartment on the first floor of a building. It was late one night, and my roommate was out when somebody knocked on the door. This was not uncommon, as we were in college, and my roommate had friends that would come by to hang out at all hours of the day. I just figured it was one of his friends, so I got up and checked the peephole. Staring right back at me through the peephole is an eyeball pressed against it. Again, this is also something that one of our friends might do just to be funny. I chuckled and opened the door, surprised to see a guy in his mid-20s that I didn't recognize. He was strange, to say the least. He was very hyper and immediately launched into a door-to-door salesman type pitch. I can't remember exactly what he was even selling, but it was something about the local university, which I also attended at the time. The whole time he was talking, he kept looking past me into the apartment. He was fidgeting and even standing on his tiptoes to see inside. Still, I just thought the guy was weird and nervous and might not have been all there. I politely declined to buy anything from him, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. I finally had to be pretty stern in telling him that I wasn't interested. He finally accepted defeat, and as I was closing the door, he put his hand out and stopped it from closing. Before I can be like, "What the duck, dude?" He smiles at me and says, "I like Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64 too." My roommate and I had been staying up late into the night playing Mario Kart 64 in my bedroom for several days prior to that. But there was nothing that he could see from the apartment entrance that had anything to do with Mario Kart. I was taken aback and trying to add things up in my head and confusingly asked, "How do you know I play Mario Kart?" He then got super nervous and said, Oh, I just thought that anyone with a couch like that would be into Mario Kart on the Nintendo 64, because, you know, it's like a retro game, and that's a retro couch." What the hell is that explanation, lol? Then he was like, "Okay, bye." And it literally scurried away. I shut the door and locked it. I start trying to put the pieces together on how he could have known that because, obviously, it wasn't because of my grandma's old couch. Remember, it's a first floor apartment that backed up to woods. My roommate got home shortly after that, and I immediately told him about the encounter. He was freaked out too, and so we started investigating. At first, it seemed as if there was no way to even see inside my bedroom. My blinds were always down. We went outside and tested it and found that the only way to see inside would have been if you had your face right up against the window, and even then you had to crouch in close one just to get a glimpse of the inside. A couple more creepy details: my window was over a balcony, and the Nintendo 64 console itself was stored inside of the TV stand and was not visible. You'd only be able to see it while we were actively playing, which we never did until we were a little stoned and it was like 2 a.m. So basically this ducking creep had been jumping the railing to our balcony, pressing his face against my window, and watching us play Mario Kart in the middle of the night. Never saw the guy again, but needless to say, I was pretty paranoid for a while after that. I constantly checked my windows and woke up in the middle of the night paranoid that he was standing just a couple of feet away, watching me sleep. Just a very unsettling encounter. I'm glad that nothing more ever came of it and that I never saw him again, but I have always wondered what his motives were. Apartment 208, an old mom. In 2013 I moved into an apartment in Alma, Arkansas. The apartment complex was next to an old graveyard, but I'm uncertain if that mattered. A little history on this apartment complex. I had lived there 3 times before in 2003, 2006, and 2009. All 3 times I got the same 1-bedroom apartment number 208. It was always the only 1-bedroom available. Every time I visited, I would witness unusual occurrences. Initially, cabinets would open spontaneously and objects would shift. Occasionally, while taking a shower and with my eyes closed, I would see the bathroom and shower cloaked in blood, with blood emanating from the shower. When I opened my eyes, everything would appear normal. The first time I lived there, that stuff intrigued me. I only moved out of that apartment to live with my girlfriend. Alma has hardly any options for apartments, and in 2006, when my girlfriend and I split up, I had to go back to the same apartment complex. The day I separated from my girlfriend coincided with the unexpected relocation of the residents of 208, resulting in my return to the same apartment for the second time. When I first moved into the apartment, it felt a bit strange, but I dismissed it as a mere coincidence. This time around things were worse. I'd hear movement in my walk-in closet and living room at night, the shower visions were more intense, and this was the year that the laughing children incident happened to me. Furthermore, I was living here when the sleep paralysis began a few months after the laughing children. My first sleep paralysis episode was terrifying. I was lying asleep next to my new girlfriend, and at about 1 a.m. I heard the DVD rack in the living room fall and many DVDs crashing to the floor. I was still half asleep when I looked towards my bedroom door, which I kept shut, and on this night I had accidentally left my bathroom, and I could see the light under my door, but as I turned my head in the direction of the noise and was about to holler out, "Who's there?" I heard running footsteps like a kid, then I saw the shadow of feet at the base of my bedroom door in the bathroom light. Then I saw the feet shadow go from being on the other side of my door to being on my side of the door, no filler shadow, just the feet, and in a blink of an eye, they moved from the door to my chest and disappeared. This all happened so fast I hadn't been able to move or speak, but after seeing the shadow feet on my chest, I went to shake my GF awake, but I couldn't move my arms. So I went to say her name, but I couldn't speak. So in a panic, I tried to sit up, but I couldn't move at all. My eyes began to get heavy, and in a second I was dreaming of a shadow holding me down, covering my mouth. I fought and widened my eyes, and it was still there. I am finally able to make a noise, but it's just a raspy, pitiful help that is barely a whisper, and I am able to slightly move my finger and touch my GF. It's enough, and she opens her eyes and asks me what's wrong. I let out my pitiful help again as I widen my eyes in fear at my chest. My GF starts shaking me, and when I don't respond, she slaps me. In an instant the shadow is gone, and I'm awake and able to move. My GF says she never heard the DVDs crashing and didn't see the shadow. The DVDs were all still on the rack when I went to check the living room. My girlfriend observed and intervened during 3 additional episodes of sleep paralysis over the subsequent months before she ultimately ended the relationship, as the experience profoundly unsettled her. And then I moved out. Fast forward to 2009, I got married in 2007, had a son that same year, and welcomed a daughter in 2009. However, my wife and I split up, leaving me in need of a place to stay. Once again, I returned to the same apartment complex because I couldn't afford anything better. Once again, for the 3rd time, the only open apartment is 208. However, I am concerned about the prospect of homelessness, so I inquired with the landlord whether moving into apartment 208 could be a temporary arrangement and, if another unit becomes available, whether I could transfer to it. He says yes, and I move in, but after 2 weeks of bloody visions, noises, and 2 more sleep paralysis episodes, I move out and stay with my family. My wife and I reconciled, but in 2013 we ultimately split for good. I received split custody and needed a local place to live. Since I required a 2-bedroom apartment this time and knew there was no chance of getting 208 because it is a 1-bedroom, I returned to the complex and ended up getting 210. This apartment is located directly next to 208. The even-numbered apartments are on the 2nd floor, and the odd ones are on the bottom. 210 was the only available 2-bedroom apartment, so I take it and tell myself at least it's not 208. No, nothing happens here at first, and my kids and I really make it our home, and then it begins. One night I am in my room, and it's 2:30 in the morning, and I hear my kids banging toys around and giggling in their room, and I hear their TV come on, and it wakes me up. Irritated, I call out, "You guys are supposed to be asleep. Thought makes me ground you." The banging and giggling stop, but I still hear the TV going, and I get up and walk to their shut door, still half asleep, and say, "Okay, kiddos, I told you to go back too." As I begin opening their door, it occurs to me that my kids are at their mom's. I had taken them back to her the evening before. A chill runs down my body as I slowly push the door open to see toys strewn all over and a cartoon playing on TV. I turn the light on, unplug the TV, and then bolt to the living room, shutting their door behind me. I turn all the lights on in the apartment and sit up on edge all night. Nothing else like this happens, but the following week, while my kids were there, I caught my 3-year-old daughter talking to someone when my 6-year-old son was not with her. I asked her who she was talking to, and she replied, "My friend old mom. Her kids got burned up, so she is kind to me because I look like her little girl." My daughter said this word for word, and usually she couldn't talk that plainly. I immediately called her mom and asked what she's been watching over there, but her mom said just her cartoons. I once again got a chill down my entire body. My son never saw what Alexis saw. Over the next few months my little girl continues to talk to and about old mom, sometimes even pointing behind me, telling me old mom is there watching me to assure that I'm a good daddy. Very creepy. My young daughter has developed an interest in spooky themes and has become captivated by frightening shows and movies over the past few years. She was only 3 and had never seen scary stuff, so I was really getting concerned and had a hard time sleeping. Then, one evening, I was reading a children's book titled The Monster in My Closet to my children. They lay in bed, and I was sitting in a chair next to their bed. The book has a page at the end that instructs the child reading it to draw the monster in their closet. This gave me an idea. I asked my daughter to draw old mom for me. She sits up, and I provide her a pencil and the book, and she says, "Can you move, Daddy? She's behind you, and I can't see her." I scoot away a little, and my little girl looks in the direction where I sat before, then looks down, draws a little, looks up again, and then draws some more and continues to do this until she finishes. She hands me the picture, I look at it, and I begin to tremble and my heart races. That weekend we moved to an apartment in the next town over. Some might argue that it was merely her imagination and that she fabricated the drawing, but considering she was only 3 years old, I believe if she had made it up, she would have focused solely on the paper while drawing. Instead, she frequently looked up as she drew, which suggests to me that she was observing her old mom while drawing the picture. Our creepy ghost story. Our ghost story begins in the wintertime, about 8 years ago. My husband, our baby daughter, and I all had encounters with ghosts that ranged from interesting to outright scary. We found a townhouse, the rent was cheap, the place was awesome, and it had great neighbors. It was seriously too good to be true. Well, we soon found out why it was. Little things at first would happen, like things would be moved, and our baby's toys would go off on their own. We chalked them all up to us moving them without thinking about it and the toys being used, as we were poor. My husband served as a serviceman and was unaware of a rare disease he has. Being in 2 tours sped this up, and it took years to find out what is happening and what caused it. His health began to decline around this time, and he was almost wheelchair bound. I was his caregiver from there on out. He has recovered, but some serious damage remains. However, we are managing well now and understand his condition and its possible causes. After a while the ghostly occurrences became like the mythical sightings of the weird roommate you rarely see or communicate with. My husband completely disagreed and stated that ghosts do not exist. This often led to debates about creatures and various conspiracy theories. But it was always about love. Well, a few weeks go by, and not a whole lot of things happen. We had a relaxing day with a quiet family evening. My husband and I snuggled watching TV, and we decided to turn in for the night. Well, we go to check on our sleeping girl, and we see a black mass hovering over her crib. We immediately panic and rush toward her room, and I swiftly lift her into my arms while my husband endures the pain of walking and searches the room frantically. Well, as much as that would rattle anyone, we were rattled, and she slept in our room from there on out until we moved out. Every week, sometimes every couple of days, we began to have experiences all the time, and each one would get worse, and each incident became more and more unnerving. We left for a couple of hours to see family and do some shopping and such, as we are super family-oriented people. Well, we drive into our parking spot, and our front door is wide open. Thankfully, we had a screen door, and we instantly went into panic mode thinking that we actually were robbed. Well, nothing was taken, nothing, in fact, was moved at all. The only thing we found was footprints on the cabinet doors. That's when things began to piss us off, and we decided to push back. We adopted a pair of black male cats, and they were so terrified of the kitchen that they refused to enter it without one of us present. They would constantly stare, hiss, and have puffy hair, standing in the living room looking straight at the kitchen even when the lights were on and off. One morning my husband walked downstairs and saw a man hiding in the curtains in the living room. Once he was seen, he was gone as quick. The black mass returned one final time as our daughter sleepwalked to my side of the bed, and we woke up to the black mass once again hovering over her bed. The worst was when my husband decided to lock up and I went to bed. I was very tired. My husband was walking up the stairs when all of a sudden we heard a blood-curdling scream. It paralyzed us. We checked the house, and we checked our baby. My husband checked outside, thinking that someone was already out investigating the source of the scream, but nothing. It was silent, so we figured that the sheriffs would be there soon for sure or, worst case, in the morning because some crazy serial killer shit just went on, and it's best to stay quiet. The next morning, nothing. My husband even knocked on our neighbors' doors to ask if they heard the phantom scream. No one heard the scream, which scared us immensely. Eventually, after things became too creepy, we called a ghost team that consisted of 3 members, but they didn't provide much help. Well, we ended up becoming friends, and we all decided to have a pizza and football last-minute thing. One day, while we were all sitting there, a display football was thrown out of its holder and directly into the window. It stopped us all dead in our tracks, and it was when we all had solid proof that this place is haunted. The next day I called our local historic person, and they said that people in our area died of yellow fever, wars, and many other causes. Plus, upon random exploration, we found a cemetery less than 100 feet away from us as well. Since we knew the number of deaths, the possible time period, and some additional information, we thought that having more details might help us live better or more harmoniously. Well, after the last few weeks of living there, we received news that my husband's father was dying and his stepmother needed some help with him. We moved suddenly, but what made us move that date, literally 45 days before, was a small cocktail glass was thrown after we all ignored the entities in our home. Finally, it wanted to make itself very well known by throwing the glass directly at our daughter. My husband barely blocked it, but it missed our baby by inches and badly sliced my husband's hand. We collected our belongings and departed, taking with us all that could be accommodated in our truck and car. We informed our landlord about our emergency as a family. Over the years, my husband has insisted that everything is just coincidence and strange occurrences. However, I disagree. That place is very much haunted. The ghosts may seem like a pretty cool thing to live with, but I can actually say that it's not. Once you mess with that and don't see the actual danger of them roping you in and turning your life into a living hell. Just be careful, you never know what or who you might run across, and whatever it is, be careful. Well, thank you for listening. Have a wonderful weekend.